You step out onto a plain that has opinions about trees, and those opinions are mostly, "No, thank you." The horizon is a low thought that never quite finishes, a line where sky and ground shake hands coldly and then put their gloves back on. Wind keeps the only schedule that matters. You look for a beam, a trunk, a pole with a decent attitude, and the land looks back at you with grass, frost, and exactly 0 lumberyards. So you start collecting the things the country does offer in surprising abundance: jaws, ribs, tusks, the grand pale architecture of animals that knew how to be winter better than you do. Bones, not beams. It sounds like a joke you tell a river, but it's the ordinary logic of an open steppe with almost no trees. You learn the grammar of mammoth bones by touch. Jaws have a built-in flatness that sits well on the ground. The hinge becomes an anchor, the long curve a foundation stone that doesn't mind frost heave. Ribs are pre-bent rafters. You set their broad curve inward, pair them across a span, and the air between them begins to feel like a ceiling. Tusks are the stakes and arches you never knew you needed. You bed their tips in packed luss, lash their sweeps together over the crown, and suddenly the sky is negotiating instead of dictating. Skulls make corners and door guardians. They also refuse to be moved without a committee and 3 jokes, which is the right number for most projects. Mainstream fact to warm with your hands. On the late Ice Age plains, from the Dnieper Basin and sites like Mezerik and Mezin, to the Kostenki, Borshchevo cluster, and farther west to Dolny Vestinis and Pavlov, archaeologists have mapped rings of mammoth jaws, piles of skulls at doorways, rib arches, central hearths, and reddened floors that speak of mammoth-bone dwellings. The wood-purged steppes still had houses. They were simply built from the biggest leftovers the landscape provided. You make a tiny city from what a giant left behind. Jaws laid cheek to cheek mark the perimeter, rib ends tilted inward like praying hands begin a roof. Tusks curve across the top so hides have a spine to rest on. You skirt the base with a sod collar to seal drafts, then pull a second skirt of snow tight against the outside so wind has to ask for a password. Inside you throw down grass mats and fur bedding, because the ground is a thief and will steal your heat through your back if you don't bribe it with thickness. The first time you lie on a floor that argues less, your bones sigh like a choir. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. On truly treeless days, you burn bone when wood sulks. It's not romance, it's chemistry. Dry, spongy fragments glow long and hot once they catch, and hearth pits on the steppe often carry layers of calcined bone mixed with charcoal. Fuel of necessity that smells faintly sweet and tells on winters that didn't care about your feelings. Bone fires don't dance like brushwood. They hold like a well-trained ember, and that's exactly what cold rooms need. Historians still argue whether builders quarried bones from old natural bone fields and riverbanks or mostly salvaged from kills, whether some houses were long-lived winter lodges revisited like favorite chapters, or seasonal hubs dressed for a single hard season and then taken down like tents. They also argue about population size. Did these close clusters mean villages you'd recognize, or just busy neighborhoods that gathered when herds did? The steppe grins in frost and allows all answers in different years. You learn a sequence that turns cold into polite background noise. Lay out the ring with jaws. Seat door stones. A skull to either side makes even a small opening feel serious. Plant tusk posts and lean rib rafters in, broad side down so hides won't sulk. Lash with sinew where it stays dry, rawhide where it can shrink and clinch, and bast where smoke will teach it manners. Throw hides over. Fur out when you want shedding, fur in when you want kindness, and weight the hem with stone drip lines so meltwater keeps its opinions outside. Add a wind baffle inside the door, a short, curved wall that makes every draft change its mind before it reaches your knees. You keep the hearth shallow and central, a low ellipse collared with stones that learn to be red under heat. A tight fire warms bodies, not rafters, Smoke finds the narrow vent where two hides overlap and wanders out in a spiral instead of dropping on heads in a sulk. You learn to rake coals sideways for cooking, back for warmth, and out into two small hearthlets for night watch, light enough to write comfort on the walls, dim enough to save fat and breath. The air in a bone house likes predictability. It becomes generous when you give it reasons. Mainstream fact: second coal on the grate. Many step houses show central hearths, ash lenses, and clean floors, sometimes with cooking pits and nearby grease-rendering basins where crushed spongy bones were heated to harvest calories. You read these layers as you would a recipe card: small fire, long patience, winter pantry. You don't waste an inch near the door. Antler pegs line the entry for hanging kit, parka, mittens, slings, so nothing damp fraternizes with bedding. A pair of jawbones turned tusk up becomes a tool rack. Points face out by rules so midnight hands don't introduce themselves to tips. A water skin lives under the nearest bedroll, inboard but within reach. Thirst is sneaky at night, and the river is a place for daytime decisions. The house, like a good story, foreshadows safety. Historians still argue whether canned bones in some dwellings mean dogs already partnered with people here, curling by the doorway to watch the snow and judge your jokes, or whether those bones were food waste and the partnership comes later. They quarrel kindly over music too. Bone flutes nearby say evening had rhythm, but whether the tune was for work, worship, or pure, because it's nicer this way, is the kind of question that keeps lamps burning. You make light after sunset with stone lamps, shallow basins of soft rock filled with rendered fat and a twist of moss wick. Set a piece of polished bone behind and you've built a one-eyed sun that lets needles find holes and stories find patience. The lamp writes a small shine on tusk and ribs so the house looks self-confident without bragging. On good nights you swear the flames flicker like they're gossiping with the jawline at the door. On bad nights you trim wicks, bank coals, and tell the lamp to mind its composure. Quirky tidbit number 2. In some houses, archaeologists find tiny beads fallen between floor mats, ivory, shell, stone, like time dandruff. 1,000 drill beads represent months of work. When you stitch 2 onto a hood brow to lift frost from your eyelashes, you're wearing labor made visible. A few escaping into the floor is the domestic version of shooting stars, proof that even careful hands shed beauty. You practice cleanliness because close air loves company you didn't invite. Ash sweep the floor daily, hang bedding to smoke and sun, keep raw and cooked zones married only by the cook's hands, never by the same basket. A bunch of aromatic leaves tossed on the hearth once a day persuades biting things to apply for visas elsewhere. The bone ring becomes a lung that breathes properly, coughs visit, but they don't set up housekeeping. Mainstream fact: third ember. Step dwellings leave hearth reddening, post holes where inner supports once stood, and distributed middens just beyond the drip line, rings of refuse that map doors and work bays. Some clusters show aligned entrances and shared windbreaks, suggesting neighborhoods rather than lonely tents. Cooperation baked into the floor plan. Joke 1 arrives while you and 3 friends argue whether a rib should lean this much or that much. You tap the arch and pronounce it minister of weather, then obey whatever sound it makes. The rib says nothing, which you interpret as carry on. Joke 2 appears when someone suggests widening the door. You remind them mammoths don't visit. We don't need their size standards. Joke 3 when the first snow slides off the hide roof in a soft whump. You bow and thank the drip line for doing its job with style. When the house finally breathes on its own, you set your habits in their new places. Coals banked in ash near the hearth shoulder. Untouchable seed ember tucked in its clay-like cradle for tomorrow. Equal sign drawn in soot and ash by the door. 2 quiet strokes you've been making since before bone turned into furniture, because ritual tells whether you're not negotiable tonight. You lie back on a bed that doesn't argue, listen to hide walls mutter politely under wind, and feel heat curve around the room like a tame animal. You didn't need trees after all. You needed structure, and structure was already lying on the plain, pale and patient, waiting for hands to teach it house. In a world that keeps changing its mind, you built a room that remembers yours. If tomorrow drags a blizzard across the line between sky and ground, the jaws will keep their decision, ribs will keep their arc, and tusks will keep their promise. The rest is soup, stitching, and the miracle of air that warms before it leaves your mouth. You don't go shopping for a roof in a forest. You go listening for it on the wind-scoured flats where winter keeps its inventory in plain sight. Your day begins with a scan of the horizon for 3 kinds of luck: a fresh carcass where wolves have done the butchery and left you the architecture, a cut bank on a river where spring floods gnawed through old ground and poured out bones like beads from a split pouch, or a bone field, a place where mammoths have been dying politely for centuries, one here, one there, until their white geometry makes a patient map. You learn which hills are stingy, and which gullies act like quiet warehouses after a thaw. Skulls shine first, then tusks, little moons peeking from lus, then the long sleepy arcs of ribs. You do not move giants with bravery, you move them with leverage and timing. The band stands around the skull and stops talking like hunters. You talk like builders. 2 poles become a stretcher under the brow. A loop of rawhide becomes a parbuckle. You pass it around the bone, cross your hands, and let the rope do the heavy thinking as the mass rolls toward you instead of away. A jaw gets a tusk for a pry bar and a flat stone for a fulcrum, and suddenly it's less like lifting a planet and more like coaxing a door. You look for the ground's help. Frozen slopes that volunteer to be ramps, drifted snow shoulders that offer gentle descents, ice tongues on river edges that behave like floors. The cold that steals heat also lends you wheels. Mainstream fact to tuck under the hauling strap: Mammoth-Bone houses in places like Meserik, Mezin, Kostenki, Dolny Vestinus, and Pavlov include dozens of mandibles, ribs, tusks, and skulls from many individuals per dwelling. Associated hearths, ash, and midden rings show these were lived-in spaces, not art projects. The sheer quantity means either repeated salvage from natural bone deposits or sustained hunting/scavenging with organized transport. Not one lucky day, but a logistics habit. You borrow the season's tools. In deep winter you lash a sled from ribs and poles, punch lacing holes through hide panels, and grease the runners with tallow until they shine like moonlight. A good crust turns the plain into a road you didn't have to build. You plant a dead man anchor, a tusk or a jaw buried crosswise in packed snow, with a long rawhide lead, and you pull in sets. 4 hands heave while 2 rest, then the next 4 trade in. In shoulder seasons, when snow sulks and the ground pretends to be glue, you switch to a travois, 2 long poles dragging a mesh of hide, and you route along grass fans and gravel tongues where friction forgets its job. Rawhide is your co-conspirator. Wet, it is a ribbon with good manners. Dry, it shrinks and locks until knots look carved. You twist bast when you need spring. You lay in sinew when you want quiet strength that forgives weather. You learn to pad the bite of every rope with folded hide so bone doesn't complain, because a cracked mandible is a doorway that won't remember its shape. You also learn that a smear of marrow grease on a hauling strap prevents the day's worst word, squeak, from taking over your life. Historians still argue whether most bones were hauled from far, true quarrying of fossil deposits, or mostly closed field salvage joined to on-site butchery. Whether builders favored winter hauling on crusted snow, the ice road hypothesis, or short-range drags year-round. Whether early dogs helped pull loads this far east and this early, or whether here, the partnership hadn't settled yet. They also debate how often whole trees were part of the kit versus the driftwood crumbs rivers and meltwater delivered. The houses are sure. The supply chains are a chorus of plausibles. your body learns a hauling cadence the way fingers learn a stitch. You set feet, take the slack, breathe in, lean, step out, and count quietly, 8 beats and a rest. Someone at the rear minders the heel ropes so a skull doesn't get ideas on a slope. On tricky descents you lay brush mats under tusks like temporary stairs. When a ridge bars the way, you slice a notch through a snow cornice and walk your cargo along a white hallway you pretended into being with poles and patience. Joke 1. When the skull finally slides obediently onto the sled, you tap it and promote it to head of household. It does not object, which is how you know you chose well. Quirky tidbit for your kit: a film of ice glaze under runners, made by tossing a dipper of water ahead and letting wind do the chilling, turns sticky snow into a soft rail. Another, a braid of hair, yes, hair, added to a rawhide cable gives tooth so par buckles bite bone instead of skating. A third, pack a handful of dry moss in your gloves. It is both warmth and grit when you need a quick sandpaper to true a sled notch. You read herd geometry the way you read the night. Trails, dust wallows, and old browse lines do not just say food, they say furniture. A herd's favorite crossings leave bone luck on floodplains, ankle bones, ribs, the long pale commas of tusks peeking after storms. You circle downwind to be polite to noses that still work, announce yourself with talk, and take only what you can carry without making the ground remember you rudely. Tomorrows you will return and be grateful you didn't make a mess. Mainstream fact, second ember. Some bone houses cluster near river terraces and lush bluffs rich in redeposited mammoth bones. Others sit within landscapes with kill sites nearby, cut-marked bones, refitted fragments, and burned broken spongy bone, grease rendering, all singing the same song. In a few dwellings, tusk arcs are set as intentional posts, not random dump. Mandibles are stacked neatly in running courses, not tumbled, clear architect's hands at work. As the sled line grows longer, jaw, rib bundle, skull, the work turns from strength to choreography. The front watches the ground, the rear watches the load, the middle watches each other's breath. You rotate jobs before pride cracks a back. You lay rest stones every bowshot, little altars that mark the day's pace. And you sing, not loudly, wind hates loud, but an accounting hum that keeps time from pretending to be a cliff. Joke 2. You tell the wind it is invited to push from behind. It pretends not to hear, which is how wind says yes. When a tusk refuses to leave the luss, you don't fight, you persuade. Dig a trench on the far side and roll it into the trench. Pack snow beneath, water the snow, and wait for it to set. Now the tusk sits higher, politely offering its belly to your paracle. If it still sulks, you build a teepee jack, 3 poles, a rope over the crown, a slow lift with 6 hands and a motto, no sharp motions. Bone prefers to be consulted. Historians still argue whether Mammoth-Bone burning for fuel was a primary goal and housing a bonus of convenient leftovers, or whether the architecture came first and the fuel was a side hustle. They also spar over seasonality. Cementum and herd demography hint at late winter procurement peaks. But how much of that is hunting and how much is scavenging winds under snow is the kind of detail time likes to smudge. Back at camp, the receiving crew turns hall into house. Jaws drop into the ring, hinge outward, molar tables level. Ribs are sorted by curve and length, the way cooks sort tubers by temperament. Tusks get tested for true, which pair makes an arch that doesn't argue with itself. The baffle wall grows from odds and ends, scapula here, a run of limb shafts there, chinked with sod and snow until drafts give up. You stack spares under an overhang like firewood, because roofs always remember reasons to want one more rib. Quirky tidbit number 2, the best hauling songs have meaningless syllables, la, ho, ta, that let cold mouths work without tripping on grammar. A good song also puts the rest in the same place every time, which is how you smuggle breathing lessons into a workday. Later folks will call this ergonomics. You just call it not getting dizzy. Safety runs like a quiet thread through every lash. No one works under a leaning skull. Every lift has a collar. Every knot has a twin. When a strap frays, you do not negotiate with it. You retire it to bundle duty and cut a new one. The child who wants to help gets the job with glory and no death. The flag, a strip of bright hide they plant when a rest stone is due. Joke 3. You promote them to marshal of pauses. They beam and become fierce about intervals, which is perfect. By dusk, the plane looks a little lighter. You've lifted some of its pale punctuation and carried it home. The sled runners lean against the jawline, steaming gently. The travois poles nap like tired legs. You carry the last tusk inside with the kind of ceremony you reserve for useful saints. The room to be smells like cold fat, clean luss, and plans. You bank the coals, stretch fingers slick with tallow, and run a thumb along a mandible's flat top, the future drip edge of your doorway. It feels like a promise under skin. You finish the day the way you finish most days, small rituals that right the room. Lash tails coiled. Pry stones stacked. Sled rope laid where no one will trip in the moon's sarcasm. You draw the equal sign and sit on the door skull and feel the house in progress nod. Tomorrow you will stitch hides, fit ribs, and teach the vent to prefer up. Tonight you rest in a ring of bones that trusted you to move them, a city's worth of white curve and memory, and feel the wind agree, just a little, to behave. You start with a circle because circles forgive. A straight wall takes offense at the smallest mistake. A ring absorbs small sins and transforms them into good enough. So you set the jaw perimeter first, hinge ends out, chewing edges in, each mandible like a pale canoe beached snug against its neighbor. You rub a thumb along the table where molars once did their honest work and feel how it sits level without asking much of the ground. 2 jaws side by side make a run. 3 begin to feel like policy. 4, and the wind suddenly behaves like a guest who remembered to wipe its feet. You make the ring true by sight and habit, not instruments. Step back. Squint. Kick a heel of lust under a proud corner. Nudge a jaw with a pry rib until its long curve echoes the others. When 2 mandibles argue, you set a thin wedge of scapula between them and tell them to be friends. The course rises in tiers. Lower ring, then a half ring atop, each joint offset so no seam climbs like a ladder for drafts. You smear sod and snow along the outer crease. The earth takes your hint and becomes mortar. Inside, the circle reads like a low wall and like intention, which is half the battle with weather. Now for the ribs, the house's gentle grammar. You sort by arc and length the way a singer sorts notes. The broadest curves become the shoulders over the widest span. The slightly stubborn ones take door duty where a short reach can still look brave. You plant the thick ends inside the jaw ring at a shallow toe and brace them against tusk stakes where you want extra courage. The thin ends climb and meet their partners overhead in a handshake you cinch with rawhide. Damp lashings dry and shrink, and the handshake tightens into friendship. The roof appears like a thought you were already thinking. Tusk stakes are the house's sentences. They say, stand, with very little vocabulary. You bed each tip deep in a packed lust socket, tamp and moisten fines, then cap with a fist-sized stone you tap to set. If 2 tusks curve toward each other over the crown like patient antlers, you lash them with a saddle wrap, crossing, snugging, crossing again, until the whole arch hums if you thump it with your knuckles. You don't thump too hard. You only need to hear the note that says compression and tension are sharing the load like decent neighbors. Mainstream fact to bank alongside the hearth. At Mezherik and Mezin, Ukraine, and Dolny Vestinus, Pavlov, Czech Republic, excavators mapped rings of mandibles laid in courses and arched ribs paired across spans. Some houses show tusk uprights set in pits, and central hearths with reddened soils. Reconstructions using these patterns stand without nails or carpentry. Compression, lash, and packed earth do the heavy thinking. You learn to translate force into curve. Wind comes from the west like a sermon. The jaw ring receives it, disperses it, and the rib vault persuades it up and over. A flat roof would collect scorn. A domed back offers no purchase. You teach the hides to lie fur out where you want shedding and fur in where you want tenderness. The hem tucks behind a drip edge. The leveled mandible ledge you groomed earlier, so meltwater writes its gossip outside. A sod skirt pressed along the base makes drafts change their minds. The result isn't silence. It's murmur, which is the steps version of hospitality. Ribs need conversation partners. You cross-brace with shorters, half ribs set orthogonal like bowed branches, lashed where they kiss a long arc. At the crown, you lay a ring of limb shafts, thick, straight, indifferent to drama, and bind rib tips to the ring. The crown ring turns a starburst of bones into a wheel, and the wheel turns a pile of curves into structure. You stand inside the nearly finished room and put your palm on a rib. It feels like the back of a calm animal. Historians still argue whether some houses carried inner posts, discrete wooden uprights now rotted, under the rib crown, or whether bone alone held the span. They also debate how many dwellings were fully domed versus semi-domed with a lean-to annex, whether tusk uprights doubled as symbols, status antlers at the door, or were purely structural. The floors are confident about rings and hearths. The roofs keep their secrets unless the soil was particularly generous. Quirky tidbit: a mammoth mandible's hollow near the ascending ramus, where nerves once traveled, makes a convenient tie hole. Thread a rawhide through, cinch a rib foot, and you've invented a prehistoric cleat. Also, the tooth rows make perfect shelves for lampstones and bone needles. You swear the house smiles when you finally notice. Hides go on like skin remembering a body. You throw the first panel up and it learns the ribs with your hands help. Pull, smooth, pull, smooth. Seams meet over a rib, not between, so water keeps its manners. Seams get a whip stitch with sinew, then a smoke kiss to set. Where two panels insist on a quarrel, you introduce a gut strip. Translucent, tough, forgiving, and the argument ends. At the crown you leave a louver. Two overlapping flaps you can prop apart with a short bone spacer. Open when soup talks, closed when storm lectures. The door is an essay in understatement. Leeward, always. Low enough you bow to enter, good for humility, better for heat. You hang an inner baffle, a curved jaw coarse waist high that forces wind to turn corners before it can trouble the beds. Over the lintel, two smaller ribs cross like gentle eyebrows and take a toggle so a hide curtain can be rolled and tied without drama. You rub a hint of fat into the curtain's lower hem so it drapes instead of argues. Mainstream physics dressed as house wisdom. The compression shell of paired ribs spreads load. The tension is in lashings and hide seams. The abutment is the jaw ring. No nails, no beams, just geometry you can feel in your knuckles. When the wind leans, the house refuses to rattle. It hums. You stage work bays between ribs like petals. Fire corner with low hearth and stone collar. Tool corner with jawbone rack and antler pegs. Sleep corner raised on mats and furs. Larder corner with cache pit and drying rack above. Each bay reads like a sentence. The whole room reads like a paragraph that makes sense even when you're tired. Joke 1. You tap a rib and inform it it's now supervisor of naps. No objections recorded. When the first roof skin settles, you do the shake test, not by shaking, but by listening. Place your ear to the hide. Wind writes a soft line. Rain rehearses a whisper. If you hear a slap, you've left a corner to sulk. Add a tie. If you hear silence, you've built a sentence without verbs. Loosen one place and let the house breathe. The room is an instrument. You tune it. Historians still argue whether Bone rings always supported full coverage or sometimes framed windbreaks with open roofs for heavy smoke work. Whether clusters of rings in some sites mark neighborhood courtyards or house rebuilds over decades. They parse post-hole arcs and ash halos like scholars of a lost poem. The poem, obstinate, reads as comfort either way. Quirky tidbit number 2. In deep cold, you can ice mortar the exterior, splash water onto the sod skirt, let wind set it, splash again. The shell turns glassy, shedding blown snow and stiffening the lower ring. No one licks the wall to check. Well, almost no one. A child once did. Now it's a story with a moral about curiosity and warm water. You finish the ribbed crown with a tiny plaza of bone, a spider of short sticks radiating from the louver's hinge, each tied with a clove that your fingers can undo with mittens on. You park a hook spatula, a repurposed rib sliver, nearby to nudge the vent during stew-scent arguments. The vent learns to mind you the way a good dog minds a hand signal. Joke 2 arrives when the first gust after roof laying shoves at the wall, and the hide barely notices. You announce to the room that weather has requested an appointment. The jaw-ring secretary will pencil it in for never. The room approves by refusing to creak. Inside, you lay a stone drip line just beneath the louver, the way a baker lays parchment, so the odd condensation bead will choose to fall there and not where someone's forehead plans to nap. You hang a bead string along the crown not for pretty, though it is, but because the tiny weights encourage the vent flap to lie well. Form pretending to be function pretending to be form. Mainstream fact, third coal. Floor plans often show paired hearths or hearth plus cooking pit, and midden arcs outside doorways. The pairing hints at 2 household occupancy or task division within one dome. The outside trash rings map consistent door positions. Houses faced leeward together, like neighbors who share the same weather philosophy. Joke 3. When you finally sit, you raise a lamp and toast the rib that complained least. The others stare, suitably chastened, which is how you avoid favoritism among bones. By now the jaw circle reads like a foundation, the ribs like ribs, the tusks like columns, the hides like sky with manners. You cross to the door, squat, and look back. The room holds. It has posture. It makes you want to whisper even when you don't need to, because whispering fits. You bank the hearth to a low ellipse of confidence, tuck the ember fox into its ash den, and draw the equal sign on the door skull's cheek, a small, private treaty between wind and we. Outside, the plane rehearses a blizzard in the next county. Inside, your house rehearses being finished. Tomorrow you'll add racks and pegs, teach the smoke to write shorter sentences, and invite soup to judge the vent. Tonight you sleep behind bones that stood for giants, now standing for you. The wind is still there. It can wait. You learn quickly that a good wall is not a single thing. It's a conversation in layers, soft talking to hard, dry whispering to damp, warm negotiating with rude. Bones gave you the shape. Now hide, sod, and snow teach the air to behave. You pick up the first panel of reindeer hide and the piece answers your hands like a well-trained blanket with opinions. First side in, it's kindness. First side out, it's shed. You decide where kindness belongs, over the beds, along the baffle, around the door frame your knees adore, and where shedding keeps weather from making friends with your ribs, the windward dome, the crown's shoulders. You're not just dressing a house, you're tailoring one. You start by hanging a liner, thin, smoke-softened hides clipped to a ring of antler toggles just inside the ribs. The gap between liner and outer shell becomes a moat for heat, a place where warmth can pace slowly without deciding it would rather visit the sky. Seams sit over a rib so water forgets how to travel. Sinew shrinks obediently as it dries, pulling panels tight with that satisfying drumhead confidence you can feel through mittens. Where 2 pieces disagree, you insert a gut strip, translucent, stubborn, good at making quarrels feel silly, and the argument ends. Mainstream fact to keep beside the vent hook. In cold country ethnographies, Sami, Nenets, Chukchi, Inuit and others, homes and tents often use double skins and air gaps, with fur orientation chosen by task. Smoke tanning makes hides water tolerant and breathable. And snow acts as a higher insulation because its trapped air shames wind into good manners. Archaeologists on the Mammoth Steppe don't find the hides, but the jaw rings, hearths, and redeposited turf bits near walls whisper the same physics. Layer, trap air, tame draft. The sod skirt is the house's hemline and its lawyer. It argues with wind so you don't have to. You slice turf in fat squares from the lee side of a distant bank, never right outside your door, because you like your camp not looking like a troubled haircut, and lay the squares like shingles against the jaw rings outside. Then you press them into place with a stone drip edge, a neat run of pebbles that will catch melt and talk it downward instead of inward. The first time you see sleep bead, hesitate, and change its mind, you promote the drip edge to minister of opinions. Joke 1. You hold a brief ceremony, which consists mostly of nodding gravely at rocks. Now you give snow its job description. Dry, clean, newly wind-packed snow is not cold's enforcer, it's cold's accountant. All neat little air pockets that make heat do math before it can leave. You bank snow shoulders up against the sod skirt, never covering your lamp holes or your sense of shame about ventilation. In deep spells you add a snow apron halfway up the dome, just a gentle bank that persuades wind to split and climb rather than find a grip. You avoid sculpting cornices, pretty as for later. Working snow goes on with a boned snow knife cut into blocks where drifts are honest, or it goes on as packed banks patted into shape with hide mitts until the surface makes that squeak only real cold can sing. Historians still argue whether turf use was routine around all Mammoth-Bone dwellings or only where soils were thick, whether snowbanking is visible in microsediments as distinct melt lenses inside drip zones, and whether some houses had inner textile or bark liners that left only ghosts, stains, pinhole arrays, a pattern of cleaner wall just inside the bone ring. The bone circles are loud, the soft liners are shy. The debates keep winter evenings lively. Inside, you train the smoke the way you train the wind. A low, elliptical hearth with a stone collar keeps flames small and explains patience to fuel. Above, your louver, two overlapping hide flaps at the crown, learns 4 moods. A finger apart for stew time, wider at sleep time so breath stays easy, kiss closed for blizzard tantrums, and half propped when you're drying a lot of wet and today's lungs can tolerate a little story about smoke. The liner gap turns upward current into a lazy spiral that reads like ventilation with manners, not a draft. You listen to the louver the way sailors listen to sails. A good house is partly sailing lesson. Quirky tidbit for the pocket near your vent hook. Sew a string of small beads, bone, shell, or seed, into the inner louver's hem. It's prettier, yes, but mostly the tiny weights teach the flap to lie and seal instead of flutter and complain. On damp days you add a ribbon of grass plate at the lower edge of the liner. It will wick the shy condensation that forms on bitter nights, guiding it to that stone drip line you so gallantly appointed earlier. Everyone praises the beads. The grass ribbon does the quiet work and never asks for credit. You become picky about fur direction. Fur out where scouring winds polish the dome. Fur in around sitting bays so elbows greet comfort. Over beds, you hang a curtain band, thin hides, fur in, down from a circlet of small ribs so sleepers get their own weather even if soup just decided to get interesting. At the baffle you lap fur in over fur out so the junction behaves like a gasket your breath won't argue with. A smear of fat along the seam keeps it from becoming a snow zipper in storm. Wind knocks, gets bored, and leaves. Mainstream fact, second ember. Caribou/reindeer hide has hollow guard hairs, an insulation trick that made it prized for parkas, sleeping covers, and tent panels among northern peoples. Paired with a smoke-softened liner, it can stay breathable and water-tolerant. In archaeological contexts, the hair is gone, but the logic hangs around in air gaps, small central fires, and vents you can frame with bone. You keep a repair bench ready because hides are honest about their mortality. 3 oval patches pre-cut, grain long, a coil of sinew in a shell to keep it politely damp, a tiny awlish made from a fish bone for quick holes. A seam that starts to sulk gets a whip over now, not a sermon later. Edge bindings along door and louver get bar tacks where hands always pull. The house learns your habits, which is to say, the places you are most likely to be lazy, and you answer by overbuilding there, which counts as wisdom. Joke 2, you tell the outer shell you've installed customer service, the louver hook and bead hem, so any complaints should be filed in triplicate. The shell offers no complaints and therefore proves your bureaucratic genius. On the floor, your insulation plan is still height. Rush mats first, then grass, then fur. You tuck a hand's width of liner down to overlap the mats so drafts can't practice sneaking between wall and floor. The sleep bay is slightly raised, 2 layers of brush under the mats, so the coldest air, which likes to be a floor lizard, pools where nobody's spine wants to nap. A narrow foot trench at the louver's plumb line catches the occasional condensation drip and turns it into a polite dark streak instead of a grudge puddle. Outside, you make peace with the season's personality. In powder months you refresh the snow apron after blow-offs. In crust months you cut block skirts and key them together with a bone sawtooth so they don't remember gravity at midnight. When thaw comes with its muddy poetry, you pull the snow back from the sod and let the skirt dry and green. Sod like sun on its face even if it now works in real estate. Historians still argue whether the ice mortar trick, splashing water to freeze a glassy shell along the base, was common or risky near hearth heat. Whether the inner baffle walls some excavators diagram were permanent ribs or seasonal screens, and how often people added snow vestibules, short, low porches of packed snow, to further house-train the wind at the door. The step keeps its poker face while the trenches whisper maybe. Quirky tidbit number 2. A line of tiny shell or seed beads stitched inside the door curtain, not visible from outside, makes a delightful soft rain sound when the flap moves, which doubles as a wind meter at night. If the beads go from whisper to chatter, someone gets up and checks the guys. Sleep continues to be a team sport. You test your weather grammar with a talkative night. The wind comes debating like a scholar. The sod skirt says not tonight. The snow apron suggests up and over. The louver converses in gentle open, close syllables until stew and lungs agree on a truce. The liner drinks a little damp and repays you by keeping the beds unsurprised. The room stays murmur warm, not summer, never summer, but that nice. My nose is curious, my toes are fine. Temperature that makes storytelling easy and repair work not lonely. Joke 3. When a tiny draft finds your ankle anyway, you look at the nearest rib and say, "All right, you win one," and stuff a tuft of grass into the suspicious seam with exaggerated dignity. The rib accepts your apology. The draft retires. Before sleep, you point at the things that did their jobs today and thank them. The bead hem louver, the sod skirt, the stone drip line that rescued a blanket from a dark circle of regret. You lay the warm stone for the patient who still likes a shoulder sun. You smooth a palm over the inner hide where it's beginning to gloss from hands, and you draw the equal sign in the soot on the door skull, small and steady, because even walls like to know you've balanced the book. Mainstream fact, third ember. Excavated floors around Mammoth-Bone houses show cleaning layers, ash lenses, and sometimes trampled plant matter, which fits a routine of sweeping, matting, and maintenance. Exterior midden arcs correspond to leeward doorways, exactly where your snow apron and sod skirt would have lived. The physics of layered barriers is older than diagrams. It just looks better under lamplight. You blow the lamp polite, Tuck the ember fox so it dreams in a small golden curl, and let the layered room hold you. Outside, winter rehearses a new essay. Inside, your sentence stands: hide, sod, snow, seal, baffle, vent, warmth, breath, quiet. The grammar is old and friendly. It says stay. By now the walls know your name, and the sod skirt has stopped judging your stitching. Time to teach the fire its manners, the quiet kind that warms bones and soup without filling the room with an autobiography of smoke. The steppe doesn't want a bonfire. It wants a low hearth, an ember animal that stretches politely and purrs. You kneel and shape the pit with your fingers like you're tucking a child in, shallow, oval, wide enough for a stew stone to lie down, ringed with a collar of stones that have already learned not to explode when surprised. Fire likes edges. Edges like stone advice. You start with small, steady fuel, twig salvage, drift crumbs, rib slat kindling, and then feed it the step's strange pantry, spongy bone broken into fist pieces for that long, even glow, a shy board of driftwood when the river feels generous, a dried turf biscuit or twist of reindeer dung. You call it meadow coal, because why not, to keep the heat saying yes without getting dramatic. You don't pile height. You spread warmth, aiming for a flame that remembers humility and coals that remember you in the morning. Mainstream fact to park beside the vent hook. Excavation floors at Meserik, Mezin, Kostenki, Dolny Vestinus, Pavlov and their neighbors show low, central hearths. Reddened soil, ash lenses, calcined bone, sometimes paired with cooking pits and basins for bone grease rendering. Spongy bone burns, marrow grease renders. Hearths sit low because heat rises and roofs complain. Micromorphology under some pits even captures trampled ash, the footprint grammar of a room that lived around a small, tidy fire. You teach the smoke a route you both can love. The louver at the crown, with its bead-weighted hem, stands a finger apart. The liner gap becomes a lazy chimney, spiraling warmth upward while bringing new breath down the sides. You rake coals sideways to simmer and rake back to warm bodies. If a gust tries to write its own draft through the door, the inner baffle wall politely turns it twice, and it gives up. You learn the room's acoustics. A happy fire goes shhh like a secret. A fire with too much fuel coughs in consonants. A starving fire sulks in vowels. You tune it with a bone spatula the way you tune a drum. Quirky tidbit for the apron pocket. You hang a small strip of wet rawhide by the crown. When smoke forgets its job and tries to hang, the rawhide darkens and drips where you can see it even in lamplight. A prehistoric smoke alarm that doesn't shriek, just tattles. Also, a pinch of crumbled charcoal rubbed into the inner louver's crease makes a tidy soot gasket. Pretty beads get the compliments. The charcoal does the work and never complains. Historians still argue whether the low hearths and vents in bone houses were primarily engineered for smoke control or simply emergent from fuel scarcity and hide roofs. Whether paired hearths marked two households sharing a dome or a task division, cooking here, rendering there. They also debate if lamps did heavy lifting most evenings with hearths kept barely alive, or if lamps were task lights while the hearth stayed boss. The soil shrugs and offers soot, ash, lampstones, and burned bone as its calm reply. Evenings settle into a choreography. A small stone lamp, shallow dish of soft rock, fat wick of twisted moss or plant fiber, sits on a mandible shelf at shoulder height. A polished rib behind it to throw light onto needlework and faces. The hearth simmers low. The render pot, a hide-lined pit or a thick bowl if luck gave you one, sits to the side with crushed spongy bone and a trickle of water, sweating out bone grease you skim with a shell. That grease is winter's battery, later stirred into mash and stews like a solvable problem you can eat. You practice the ash blanket, raking a thin comforter over coals before sleep so the ember fox can dream all night without wandering. A small seed coal, untouchable by rule, lives in a clay-like cradle at the hearth's shoulder. If everything misbehaves tomorrow, that cold becomes forgiveness. In hard winds you recess the fire a thumb deeper, set the louver to half, and accept a little extra smudge on your brow in exchange for air that moves. Mainstream fact: second ember. Bone houses often include multiple ash phases, suggesting banked fires and relighting. Nearby lampstones with wick wear and fat residues show lamplight was normal. Fire-cracked rock is rarer on the Lust Steppe than in stone-rich valleys. Fuel and cookery lean on bone, fat, and shallow pits, not roaring stone kills. You keep air honest with small habits. Kettle on, always. Steam persuades dry coughs to write shorter sentences. Door crack 2 fingers when too many voices crowd. Wet cloth hung briefly by the louver when the room turns into a desert to tame dust without watering walls. You watch for walls slick, tiny condensation beads on the liner, and widen the crown a little so breath has places to stand. Joke 1. You pin a charred twig behind your ear and promote yourself to manager of weather complaints. The fire hisses softly, which you interpret as a formal request for fewer meetings. Fuel has seasons. In snap cold, the bone glow carries the shift with little flame, less smoke. In thaw you can coax the river's gray drift to behave for an hour. In damp, tinder fungus, amadou, dried near the louver becomes slow match you baby along until the rest of the kit wakes. You save fat drips from roasting racks, not for lamps, they like cleaner fat, but for fire starting on days when kindling sulks. A twist of dry grass, a breath, and you have a new paragraph. Quirky tidbit number 2. Hang a snowball in a bark cup on a peg by the hearth. On painfully dry nights it melts slowly, adding just enough breath to the air that noses stop filing complaints. It also makes a tiny encouraging plink now and then, which your band decides is the house saying carry on. Historians still argue whether the soot bands on cave ceilings and house crowns record daily lamplight heights or ceremonial events, whether some hearth collars were deliberately clayed to buffer heat and reduce sparks, or just reddened lust toughened by repetitive use. They also chew on whether render basins were in-house winter work or outsourced to windward pits, given the smell's talent for staging a coup. Your nose votes for downwind rendering, weather permitting. Cooking adopts low-fire diplomacy. Stew lives on the coal's shoulder, not in the tantrum center. Flat cakes spread on a hot slate perched over a quiet red. Tubers like ash beds where they learn humility without complaint. You keep 2 sticks near the hearth. A poke, for explaining boundaries to wood, and a lift, for moving stones like they're sleeping children. When someone gets chatty and forgets the pot, the room grows a single, unified mood. You crack the louver wider, and the stew files a formal grievance with less passion. You think about safety without letting it turn into a sermon. Knives live points out on the jaw rack. Kids get a chalk line where toes stop and stories begin. Waterskin sits inboard because midnight thirst is real and rivers are not. If a spark tries to audition for trouble, a damp whisk made from grass and a rib tells it not tonight. You keep a spare mat, singe-friendly and already resigned, under the cooking slate so mistakes have a place to land. Mainstream fact: third ember. Some floors preserve concentric ash rakes, thin layers that show routine sweeping, banking, and recentering fire. Charcoal spectra and fatty residues show ruminant fats, not just wood, feeding lamps and flames. Archaeologists have also noted clean edges around hearths, little crescent zones of fewer artifacts, matching that tidy habit you keep of sweeping fire skirts each evening. Joke 2. You tell the kettle it has achieved the rank of captain of morale. It answers by almost boiling and then making you wait, which is exactly the kind of leadership you expected. At night the room breathes in visible lines. Heat climbs the inner hide, turns at the crown, and drifts down the opposite side like a warm waterfall. You can see it in lamp wobble, feel it on eyelashes. You tilt the louver spacer one finger to catch a sulk, slide it back when stars stop arguing with the vent. You notice the bead hem whispering against hide, and you know by sound whether the wind outdoors has ideas or has gone to bed. Joke 3 arrives when someone brings a too ambitious log salvaged from a snag. You pat it, thank it for its service, and feed it to the outdoor fire instead. Inside, we burn sentences, not chapters. By the time sleep arrives, the ember fox is tucked in its ash den with 2 tiny ears of orange showing. The lamp is pinched to a blue sigh. The seed coal sits smug in its cradle, and the air tastes like stew plus a small apology to lungs that will be cancelled by morning. You smooth the hearth's collar with the flat of your hand and feel the day's heat stored like a secret. You draw the equal sign beside the door skull. 2 soft strokes in soot, and the house seems to settle, ribs relaxing, hides dozing, bead hem still. Outside, the wind invents a new argument and presents it to the wall. Inside, the hearth answers with quiet grammar, low flame, wide warmth, updraft, out. You lie back hearing the shoo of a fire that knows your rules and likes them. Tomorrow the same small miracles will repeat. Bank, breathe, simmer, mend, and the roof will remain a sky with manners over a room that exhales. The roof learns to keep weather in its lane, but the ground is still a thief, stealing heat through your back, sending up damp like rumors, inviting the sort of tiny citizens who think your ribs are a neighborhood. So you start the lesson where comfort begins, floors that save heat. You don't build a palace, you build a quilt you can walk on, brush, mats, and fur, each layer doing a different job so the night doesn't do any. First, a brush mattress, a thin crisscross of willow switches, broomy twigs, and dry grass fans laid directly on the luss. The goal isn't softness, it's space. Little pockets of air behave like polite bodyguards, blocking cold from marching straight up. You keep the layer open enough that spilled water has somewhere to go, and doesn't decide to write a swamp under your bed. Over the brush you set mats, woven rush, sedge, or coarse grass, stitched with bass so seams lie flat and splinters keep their opinions to themselves. The mats make a stage, the brush makes the orchestra pit. Together they teach your bones to stop filing complaints at midnight. Mainstream fact to warm with. Ancient camps on very different landscapes show the same layer logic. At Ohalo II by the Sea of Galilee, ca 23,000 years ago, archaeologists found brush bedding, grasses and sedges laid as sleeping platforms, while at Border Cave, southern Africa, ca 200,000 years ago, plant bedding with ash layers seems to have deterred insects. Paleolithic hut floors in the lush plains preserve trampled plant microfossils and thin ash lenses that look suspiciously like swept, relayed mats. Different continents, same lesson, lift, layer, and keep pests humble. You appoint a mat steward, not a title anyone asks for, and that person shakes and flips one baize mats each morning while the steam from the kettle scolds the room into wakefulness. Mat edges lap under the hide liner by a hand's width so drafts can't sneak between wall and floor like teenagers past curfew. Where feet always land, you add where patches, smaller rush squares bar tacked in place. When a mat starts to speak and crackle, it's time to demote it to door mud catcher and weave a fresh one during story hour. Now the top layer, for bedding, reindeer if fortune smiled, bison if winter owed you a favor, hair patchwork if the year insisted on modesty. You lay fur in for kindness, fur out if the season is shedding friendly, and you'd like sleep to come without a speech. The trick is breath. Too many hides make a sweat tent, too few make a complaint department. You tune it like soup, one ladle more, one less, until backs stop writing novels and noses stop waking first. Along the bed's edge you lash a curtain band of thin hide from a ring of small ribs. It hangs to shoulder height and makes a microclimate where breath warms and drafts lose enthusiasm. Quirky tidbit for the pocket, a sprig of wormwood. The steppe is stingy about trees but generous with artemisia. Crushed into bedding discourages fleas and makes sleep smell faintly medicinal in a way grandmothers would approve. In warmer months, a little sweet gale or wild mint plated into the mat edges earns the title Minister of Opinions about insects. No one argues with the minister, least of all the insects. You add 2-foot suns, stones warmed at the hearth, wrapped in thin hide, and tucked near ankles beneath the furs. They don't brag. They just hold. A third, smaller warm stone travels to the smallest sleeper, the same milk stone you rotate on cold mornings, because comfort likes familiar faces. Joke 1. You promote the flattest mat to head of naps. It accepts with a dignified lack of sound. Historians still argue whether Upper Paleolithic households slept as nuclear pods around separate hearth corners or as communal rings with a single heat source. Whether raised pallets ever stood on low posts inside Mammoth-Bone houses or whether the archaeological post holes in some plans were hangers and rack supports instead. They also politely bicker over how often bedding was seasonally replaced versus patched forever. Floors give us trampled layers and plant ghosts. The choreography above them is a reconstruction built from what works. The pest plan lives in your pocket as 3 rules. 1. Ash is armor. You sweep a thin ash veil under mats once a week. It dries what mustn't mildew and gives small biters a bad day. 2. Smoke is a librarian, just enough in the evening to file airborne nuisances back on their shelves. 3. Sun is a doctor. On good days you flip furs over a jawbone rack near the door so low light and breeze can edit out last night. When winter is mean, smoke stands in for sun and you pretend you like the smell. You make zones because comfort is a geography. Sleep bays sit higher, 2 brush layers instead of 1, so the coldest air pools under the hearth's plumb line, not under spines. A foot trench cut shallow in the main aisle catches drips from the crown drip line and keeps the aisle dry. By the door, a mud mat takes boot opinions before they enter polite society. The water skin lives inboard of the mat edge so midnight thirst is solved without negotiations with the river. None of this is fancy. All of this is policy. Mainstream fact, second ember. Mammoth-Bone dwellings often show clean floors, ash rakes, and distinct activity bays. Some have cache pits by sleeping areas and midden arcs beyond the drip line. Micromorphology. Those thin slices of floor read under microscopes, reveals trampled phytoliths, plant silica bodies, and thin ash laminae that look like regular sweep and replace routines. The tidy rings outside doors are your future trash day, already on the calendar. You give the door its own little theater, a booting stone to sit on, a brush whisk, rush bundle on a short rib handle, to convince snow and mud to reconsider their life choices, and a hide pocket tacked low where small travelers can stash pebbles and other treasures before they meet beds. The pocket saves fights. The whisk saves floors. The stone saves knees. Joke 2. You thank the whisk aloud every evening. The whisk never responds, which is the proper humility for a broom. Sleep needs rhythm, so the room learns a routine. Midday, flip and air 1 baize mats. Evening, shake, smooth, tuck. After stew, lay warm stones. Before lamp out, tap each mat edge with the back of your hand. Listen for hollow confidence rather than wet sulk. If sulk, lift a corner and slide a handful of dry grass in. If confidence, say good job out loud, because praise is cheap and mats seem to hear. Historians still argue whether vermin control in deep time lean more on ash and smoke or on repellent plants and hanging storage. Whether lice combs existed this early here or if abrasive washes and head shaving did most of the work. They also tease apart whether the matted floors at some sites doubled as work surfaces in day hours or whether separate reed mats were pulled out for grinding and sewing. Floors only admit people were picky, for good reasons. You teach children the floor song, literally. Brush, mat, fur, shake, smooth, purr. It's silly. It sticks. A small hand learns to see crumbs and hear damp. A bigger hand learns to ferry warm stones without heroics. An elder who hates drafts receives the seat downwind of the hearth where the curtain band makes a small, civilized winter around knees. Everyone gets a say. Floor plans are consensus documents written in grass. Quirky tidbit number 2. If you twist nettle fiber into a doormat braid and lace it across the threshold, dry grit collects obediently between strands and falls out with a shake, while wet grit stops at the first knot like a disappointed traveler. Nettle also tells small biting things to consider other careers. It's a doormat with opinions, which is exactly what you want. Sometimes you treat yourself to luxury, a thin felted pad made from down hair teased from winter hides, needled lightly with a barbed thorn tool until it agrees to be a cloud. It sits under a shoulder that argued with sled duty. It whispers there. You pretend it's for the patient, but everyone knows you borrowed it last week and returned it smelling like good sleep. Mainstream fact, third ember. Ethnographies in cold regions praise off-ground sleeping, even by a palm's breadth, for heat retention and condensation control. Archaeological floors near hearths show differential compaction, harder where people stood, softer where mats stamped footfall. The science word is insulation. The camp word is when you lie down. Joke 3. When the first snow melt bead dares to form on a cold night, it lands neatly in the drip trench, and you salute the trench with your spoon. To quiet heroes. The trench says nothing, which is impeccable manners for plumbing. When the room yawns and the lamp blinks one blue blink, you do your small closing theater. Warm stones tucked. Mats smooth with the flat of a palm. For nap stroke the right way once, because you are superstitious about that, and it costs nothing. The ember fox gets its ash blanket. The seed coal sits in its cradle like a tiny, smug king. You draw the equal sign on the door skull, 2 calm strokes, and feel the floor answer with stillness. Outside, wind rehearses latest gossip with the sod skirt and loses interest. Inside, the brush breathes, the mats remember, the fur agrees, and your back becomes a happy citizen of a city you made 20 centimeters tall. You slide down into the bowl you carved from air and habit, and think the oldest praise a sleeper knows. This will do. And then, like a good match shaken free of grit, you drop the day and lie quiet. You learn quickly that a door is not a hole, it's a policy. It decides what the weather gets to say, what smells are allowed to leave, what knees must do before they join the soup. So you set yours where manners live, leeward, always, low enough that every person who enters has to bow, a ceremony disguised as architecture. It's only half about heat, it's half about tone. The house speaks softly. You answer in kind. A jaw pair frames the opening, hinges out, chewing tables level, so the threshold feels like a thought that's been considered. Over them you see 2 small ribs as a gentle lintel, crossing like calm eyebrows. The door skin is thick, smoke softened, and hung on antler toggles so winter can't argue it off. You rub a trace of fat into the lower hem and stitch a thin lead cord along the edge. The fat teaches it to drape instead of flap, and the cord keeps fingers from grabbing hide with wet hands. A row of tiny beads stitched inside the curtain hem makes a soft rain sound when wind does try, your night wind meter you can hear from the sleep bay. Inside, 2 paces in, you build a baffle, a low, curved wall of stacked scapula and limb shafts, chinked with sod and fur scraps, so air must turn twice before it reaches ankles. Think of it as a polite hallway that convinces drafts to change the subject. The baffle earns you 3 economies. It holds a pocket of warmer air where fingers recover. It stores door tools, whisk, toggle pins, a spare thong, on the sheltered side, and it hides the sleep bays from a midnight visitor who still remembers the night sky and hasn't adjusted their voice yet. Joke 1. You promote the baffle to doorman of the wind. It nods by not moving. Mainstream fact to lay beside the threshold. Around Mammoth-Bone dwellings at Mezerik, Mezin, Dolny Vestinus, Pavlov, Archaeologists often find midden arcs and soot trampled directly outside a consistent opening, evidence of a leeward door used and reused, as well as inner post arcs some interpret as screens or baffles. Drip and melt marks just beyond the wall line map where roof shed water was managed, not ignored. The floor plans read like doorways that taught weather manners. Outside the door, you draw a drip edge and a drip trench like a comma and its tail. The edge is a tidy bead of stones laid just beyond the mossy sod skirt. The trench is a palm-deep groove that persuades snowmelt to travel down and away, not in and opinionated. On storm days you brush fresh snow off the lintel skin so the curtain doesn't freeze to itself. On thaw days you clear a fingertip channel along the trench to keep puddles from becoming cold sarcasm. Nothing here is grand. Everything is civilized. Historians still argue whether some houses carried snow vestibules, short, low porches of packed snow forming a true cold trap, or whether that is an ethnographic echo from icehouse neighbors projected onto the bone ring, whether the inner baffle walls were permanent ribs or seasonal panels hung only in hard months, and whether stone drip lines were originally laid or merely emerged from repeated sweeping and water paths. The sites offer arcs and stains. The rest is what works. You practice door choreography until it becomes a lullaby. Coming in, shake at the whisk stone, a seated rock to save knees, brush boots with the rush whisk, hang the parka on antler pegs, stow wet mitts on the jaw shelf where the drip edge waits, loosen curtain toggle, turn right around the baffle, breathe. Going out, lift the bead hem so it doesn't mop the floor. Check the shell chime hung in the opening. One soft clack means wind is a gentleman. Eye the sky slit at the crown to judge gusts. Confirm the water skin is inboard because midnight you will forget. And do not let a glowing coal near the door. The ember fox stays inboard by law. Joke 2. You pin a sliver of charcoal behind your ear and declare yourself commissioner of toggles and whisks. The room hums its support by continuing to work. Quirky tidbit for your kit. You tie 3 knots in the inner door cord at dusk. Tight if the wind is honest, loose if it's a gossip. So anyone up at night can tell by touch whether the curtain should be open 2 fingers or just a breath. In thaw, you sprinkle a salt ash pinch along the threshold to unconvince ice about forming a friendship with the hide hem. A spare flat rib lives by the door as your ice spatula. It slides without tearing, which earns it the title clerk of edges. The baffle's back becomes the mudroom of a prehistory that does not know the phrase. Jawbone racks their hold tools points out for midnight hands. Antler pegs secure the lamp stone when not in use so no one toes it in the dark. A pocket sewn to the baffle keeps small treasures from meeting bedding, pebbles, fish hooks, one bead a child swears escaped on purpose. Above, a short drying line catches the drip from mitts and hats so their autobiography stays local and doesn't wander into the furs. Mainstream physics in doorstep clothes. The low bow in reduces convective spill. The baffle forces a pressure drop. The drip edge and trench make water choose gravity in the correct direction. Leeward doors keep gust fronts from using your dome as a flute. You don't say any of this out loud. You just notice that shoulders relax when a door is placed with manners. You also train the light that leaks through that opening. A tiny lamp niche set into the baffle's curve, with a polished rib reflector, throws just enough glow on the threshold to make toes honest without advertising your room to the step. If you must open in storm dark, you crack the curtain only to bead sound, count 1, 2, then seal. The bead song tells you if wind intends trouble. If it chatters, you let the baffle be the mouth that answers, not tonight. Historians still argue whether the midden arcs outside doors record domestic rhythm, peelings, ash, bones tossed to a regular spot, or moments of communal butchery when neighbors borrowed hearth and threshold together. Some houses show paired doors, whether those are phased rebuilds cutting through earlier rings or 2-family arrangements makes for lively trench debates. Your door has only one opinion, open as needed, close with grace. You adopt door weather rules the way you adopted the hearths. If the curtain comes in wet, you squeegee it with the flat rib and hang it on outer toggles beneath the lintel for a quarter hour. If it tries to freeze, you massage the fat hem with warm fingers until it remembers drape. On blizzard nights you mount a snow collar against the outer sod just to the right and left of the opening, not across it, so eddies split and weaken. If drift starts to seduce the doorway, you cut it into blocks and stack them as a wind fence 2 paces out, creating a tiny courtyard that keeps gusts busy before they meet your curtain. Quirky tidbit number 2, a 2-seed rattle, dry pods strung on a thread, hung inside the baffle becomes your mouse notice, a delicate tick-tick if a curious citizen tries a nighttime inspection. It's not a trap, it's a conversation starter for the cat that isn't here, your whisk and tidy habits. Safety lives at the threshold. Just before sleep someone lashes a soft bar, a braided cord, across the base of the doorway at ankle height. Toddlers stop, nightwalkers feel, and coals know their jurisdiction ends here. The shell chime hangs on an inside peg where a brush of hide sets it talking, a gentle click reminding the late one to retie the toggle. No scolding, just sound policy. Mainstream fact, second ember. Outside openings of Upper Paleolithic dwellings, excavators note concentrated small bones, flakes, and ash, the life of a threshold captured in trash rings. Some houses preserve stone pavements or pebble spreads just beyond doors, read as drip management and mud discipline. A few show post pits that line up with baffles, supporting the idea of inner screens. The picture is consistent. Doors taught behavior to weather and people both. Joke 3. When a guest flips the curtain too wide and the room sighs in a single, united draft, you bow toward the baffle and say, "Our doorman will accept your apology in beads." 2-seed beads are ceremonially placed in the pocket. The guest laughs. The room forgives. At days and the entry set rests in its places. Whisk leaning. Rib spatula parked, seed lash laid, shell chime quiet. You brush a palm along the jaw ledges and feel their smooth gloss where hands have learned the doorway's grammar. Outside, melt whispers down the trench you cut with care. Inside, the bead hem hangs still and the baffle holds a pocket of air as warm as good manners. You do your small nightly treaty. The ember fox is banked. The seed coal sits in its cradle like a thought you'll finish tomorrow. You trace the equal sign on the door skull's cheek, 2 easy strokes that say balanced. Then you bow, because the door reminds you, and slip into a room that keeps its promise even when wind would rather it didn't. The curtain falls back with the faintest rain sound of beads, and the house smiles and ribs and hides. A house that only warms you as a kind friend. A house that feeds you next month as family. Once the ribs stop arguing and the hearth learns indoor voice, you turn to the quiet magic of storage. Pits that stay cold and honest, racks that ask smoke to be useful, and pots, or their Ice Age cousins, that teach fat to wait. You're not hoarding, you're flattening the weather, taking the spike of luck from one loud day and ironing it across a calendar made of bowls. Start with the cash pit. The steps pantry in a single gesture. You pick a spot inboard of the drip line but downwind of the sleep bays, where the floor stays cool and dry. You carve a narrow neck and a wide belly into the luss with a ribbed spatula and a patient wrist. Shape it like a gourd so smells don't wander and paws can't negotiate. Line the belly with grass mat and a thin hide, sprinkle a veil of ash, pests hate ash's personality. Lay in the dried good things, strips of meat, flat cakes of tuber meal, that shy bag of seeds you plan to become less shy in spring, and seal with hide, a plug of tantalus, and a tidy stone lid under your mat. You mark the spot with 3 beads stitched under the mat's edge where only your fingers will find them, because memory in winter needs handles. Mainstream fact to keep near your ladle. Upper Paleolithic dwellings on the Luss Plains. Mesorik, Mezin, Kostenki, Dalny Vestinus, Pavlov, often preserve subfloor pits, ash-lined hollows, and reddened basins adjacent to hearths. Some pits hold trampled plant bits, burned bone crumbs, and fragments interpreted as storage or processing features rather than mere trash. Far away and earlier, brush huts at Ohalo too kept seed caches and grinding stones together like a shopping list, proof that houses and pantries have been roommates for a very long time. Now the racks, your house's ribcage for food. 2 tusk posts and a crossbar of limb bone, thong lashed into a square at the smokier edge of the hearth, become a drying tier. On good days, the outer rack stands just outside the door in the lee, so wind can do honest work. On bad days, you bring the job inside and let smoke be foreman. Strips of meat hang with intentional space between them. Crowding is how rot writes its autobiography. Fish fillets get a fan of sea lettuce or read between layers if you're lucky enough to be traveling the coast this season. Tuber slices, parched and thin, line a ribbed griddle propped over the coals. The room smells like promise. You climb the last hill of winter with the help of bone grease, which sounds indelicate and is actually logistics with a shine. You pile crushed spongy bone into a shallow render basin, a lined pit or a thick-walled vessel if luck smiled, add a trickle of water, and simmer at the hearth's red shoulder. Fat rises. Liquid patience you skim with a shell and pour into stomach bags or bladders you cleaned and smoke-sweetened. When set, the fat keeps like a well-behaved story. Stir it back into pounded dried meat and tuber meal, and you've made a travel paste that doesn't brag but walks for days. You don't need a new word. You just need calories that don't complain in weather. Historians still argue whether all those crushed cancellous bones around hearths were burned mostly as fuel or simmered first to render grease. Whether some basins were pots in your sense, or hide-lined pits toughened with clay and fat. Whether subfloor pits were primarily storage or cool trash that got recycled as needed. They also quarrel politely about how often freeze-drying, meat hung in very cold, very dry air, was the plan versus a happy accident of climate. The sites give us ash, bone, pits, residues. Experience supplies the menu. Quirky tidbit for your pouch. A thin greased lid poured over a cooled pot of broth gel seals it like a polite lake. Scoop from beneath and replace the lid, and the soup refrains from meeting the air too often. Another, a tiny pinch of salt ash, alkaline, not table salt, whisked into tuber paste changes how it cooks. Less sulking, more set. Useful for making carry cakes that don't crumble at mile 5. Order lives on pegs and shelves. The mandible ledge by the door holds lamp stones and toggle pins. Above the hearth, a jawbone rack with points facing out keeps hooks and needles where midnight hands won't bleed for their curiosity. A cord ledger, 3 short thongs tied to a rib, becomes your ration board. 1 knot slit each evening so soups don't get optimistic during the first pretty thaw. Joke 1. You salute the ledger and call it Minister of Tomorrow. The ledger says nothing, which is the kind of restraint you want in a minister. Outside, you practice ground cold the way your cousins practice wind. A frost cache, pit dug beyond the drip line, deeper, ice-shouldered, lined in brush and hide, keeps heavy cuts honest. You cap it with sod blocks like a chessboard and stamp the pattern into muscle memory so even in a whiteout your feet can find dinner's address. In a thaw, you lift a corner, sniff, your nose is your first inspector, replace the block, and reset the stone fox. That little cairn only your people read, so neighbors know whose pit and what mood it's in. Mainstream fact, second ember. Steps sites preserve pits beyond house rings, sometimes with cooler fill, faunal bits, and layering distinct from hearth ash. Ethnographic analogies from Arctic/subarctic households show permafrost cellars, snow mounding, and sod cappings as routine food keeping. Tricks. Translate with caution, say the careful ones. Translate with physics, say you're back. Cold, dark, sealed beats hope every time. You keep a clean line between raw and ready. Raw comes in left, hangs high. drips into a catch tray you empty outside. Ready lives right, above a mat you actually like. Ash brooms sweep daily. Flies, when the world remembers there are such things, get a smoke reminder in the afternoon. Smell is your clerk, sweet, sour, clean, wrong, and you never tell the clerk their job is small. If something sings in a key you don't recognize, it moves to the outdoor line to audition for neighbors with stronger stomachs. Joke 2. You elevate a shell scoop full of rendered fat and declare it director of morale. The band applauds with spoons. The scoop, tragically short-lived, accepts by becoming supper. Racks do more than dry food. They multiply space. A two-tier grid above the hearth dries boots, mitts, thread, and the felt pad that has quietly become your cult object. A side rack holds gut strings, twisted, drying, sinew skeins, pre-wetted, waiting, and smoke-sweetened bladders turned into canteens. The house smells like you plan to be alive in February, which is the correct smell. Historians still argue whether some subfloor holes in bone houses were post pits for inner frames or cool storage, whether clusters of broken long bones near pits shout grease parties or fuel sorting, whether the red-stained floors are from hearth migration, render spills, or ochre habits we don't fully understand. Everyone agrees on the big picture. Houses were workshops as much as bedrooms, and winter pantries were built into the plan. Quirky tidbit number 2. You keep a spice kit by accident. Just charcoal dust, a pinch of salt ash, and a twist of dried bitter leaf that turns. We're out of exciting into, oh, that's interesting, on stew nights. You call it chef's handful and pretend it's a secret. But children see everything and will sell your recipe for 2 beads and a story. Because storage fails quietly if labels fail loudly, you invent a knot code. 1 overhand on the bladder neck means pure fat. 1 overhand plus a half hitch is fat with marrow. A reef knot says travel paste. A figure 8 you reserve for medicine things, bitter herbs, smoke-softened resins, so nobody turns stitch salve into gravy. You can read it at midnight by finger and not be wrong. Joke 3. You inform the knot board it is now Dean of Culinary Studies. It maintains rigorous standards by refusing to untie itself. Mainstream fact, third ember. Residues on lampstones and interior surfaces show animal fats, not just wood tar. Planed antler pegs and tidy post arrays speak to hanging storage. Outside midden rings sort into ash, broken bone, and food waste, implying a steady rhythm. Cook, skim, dry, cache, sweep. When archaeologists map these halos, they can reconstruct rooms that behave very much like the one you are standing in, head tipped, listening to racks click gently as they settle. Evening arrives. The ember fox gets its ash blanket. The seed coal smiles from its cradle. You set a shell of grease aside for the lamp and 1 for tomorrow's mash. You pat the stone lid over the cache pit like a sleeping shoulder. Adjust the inner bead hem at the door so wind won't read your pantry by smell, and run your finger along the knot code to double-check your own memory. Then, as always, you draw the equal sign on the door skull, 2 neat strokes, and feel the room answer back with stored quiet. Outside, the plane spools its long, hungry paragraph. Inside, your racks and pits add commas, pauses you can eat. The house is no longer just a shelter. It's a calendar with meat on it, a promise edited into fat, a place where luck becomes inventory and tomorrow stops making threats. You lie down with the comfortable knowledge that if Blizzard decides to write a trilogy, you still own the ending. You discover that order is a kind of kindness, especially at midnight when hands behave like strangers and toes invent new ways to be surprised. So you move the camp's sharp gossip to a place where manners live, by the door, where the baffle keeps its pocket of warm air, and the jaw ledge has already learned to behave like a shelf. Tools don't roam, tools check in. The rule is simple enough to remember when Sleepy points out, always, hooks, awls, needles, blades stored with their business ends away from the aisle so a reaching hand meets handle first and dignity lives to see breakfast. You start with pegs because vertical is where small rooms find extra space. Short antler tines shaved flat on the back, wedged between ribs and liner, become a forest of honest hooks. The pegs near the threshold get heavy jobs, parkas, wet mitts, the door whisk, while the higher ones serve light, sharp, and not to be tripped over. The pressure flaker, antler tip for retouching, the hide strop, a sleek tongue of smoke-softened skin, the bone polisher that makes seams forget they were once arguments. Where the liner won't carry weight, you lash a crossbar of limb bone between two rib feet and suddenly your wall grows shoulders. The jawbone rack is your door's quiet genius. Turn molars up, it becomes a row of shallow trays where the lampstone, toggle pins, all bundle, and bone needles in their bird bone tubes sit with faces showing. In the pre-midnight hush, your fingers read that shelf-like braille, smooth lamp-dish, rough pinhead cool tube, so you don't have to wake your eyes to borrow fire or stitch silence. You strap a tiny grease bowl, charcoal and tallow, your writing and waterproofing mix, under the jaws ledge where it won't append itself into somebody's sock. Mainstream fact to hang on a peg beside this habit. At Mammoth-Bone dwellings like Meserik, Mezin, Kostenki, and Dolny Vestinus, Pavlov, archaeologists find clusters of retouchers, antler tips, flint cores, bone awls, eyed needles, and bladelets concentrated near door arcs and hearth margins, plus pebble palettes with fat/charcoal. Residues and engraved ivory that may have been covers or handles. Room edges weren't empty. They were work walls with kit ready where hands entered. You do a dusk check every day that the weather remembers to show up. The commissioner of toggles and whisks, that's you, charcoal behind ear, calls the roll. Knife thong sound, all tube capped, pressure flaker point out, lampstone cool, tinder nest dry, lashing knife sheath on, seed lash bar across the base of the door tied, shell chime hum, water skin inboard. It takes a minute, it buys a night. Joke 1, you wrap the jaw ledge with a knuckle and announce. Inspection. The ledge declines comment, which is exactly the level of cooperation you want from furniture. Historians still argue whether jaw ledges and peg arrays we infer from artifact clusters were permanent fixtures or seasonal improvisations. Whether points out is your clever rule or an ethnographic echo projected backward from recent Arctic houses. Whether carved plaques and figurines near doors were proud displays, tool guards, or things that just kept getting lost in the same place. They also debate if the door zone was gendered space, sewing and kit management versus butchery and hauling, or if everyone just used the place with the best light and air. The trench gives us patterns. Intent keeps its hat low. You tame pitch and grit at the threshold because both love to wander. A glossy lump of birch tar sits in a clamshell by the baffle, cap for sinew knots, seal for cracked canteens, tooth comfort if a mouth goes political. Beside it, a pouch of fine sand and a flat rib card make a quick field lap, 3 strokes on rib, 1 wipe on fur, and a dull scraper remembers how to be a scraper. You string a thin cord ledger, 3 short thongs, on the nearest rib and tie 1 knot per person on the day's ration plan. At dinner a knot slides over. It is not drama. It is tomorrow insurance. Quirky tidbit for the shelf. You blacken each knife handle end with a thumb of charcoal. 1 stripe for bone knife, 2 for flake knife, and dot the all caps with ochre. In lamplight those low contrast codes pop like little moons. Your hand picks the right voice by shape and shine. Another odd helper, a goose quill, or a hollow bird bone, stuffed with needles and 2 color threads, plain sinew and a smoke-darkened twist, so night repairs stop pretending to be puzzles. You mind the aisle like it's a small river. Nothing sharp lives waist-high near the flow, cords run high or hug ribs, never cross where feet write biographies. The midnight cup has a home, jaw shelf, rightmost tray, And the midnight knife has a name, the quiet one, with a fat wrapped handle so it can be found by feel and returned without looking. Joke 2. You hold the quiet one up and grant it the honorary rank of Minister of Late Thoughts. It glints once and pretends to understand. Mainstream fact, second ember. Use where studies show polishing and microchipping on antler retouchers consistent with edge maintenance. Eye needles, some astonishingly fine, occur in lust step sites alongside spatulate burnishers and scrapers, implying sewing corners and strop stations. At several sites, bones/antler tool caches occur near door arcs with sudier floors, hinting at traffic and task stations staged there. Houses were tool theaters, and the wings by the door were busy. You give sound a job because eyes fail you when lamplight yawns. The shell chime at the curtain talks in 3 dialects: single click, gentle breeze, too quick, gust thinking about manners, a rattle, asterisk asterisk someone forgot the toggle. Inside the baffle, a pod rattle on a peg sings tick tick if a mouse tests your storage or a child's bead decides to defect. You don't chase sound with panic, you answer it with the right hand, from the right peg, at the right height. Historians still argue whether miniature figurines and engraved plaques found near door zones are household guardians, playthings, teaching tools, or kit components, like loom weights, net gauges, we keep misreading as art. They also argue if decorated handles on awls and needles meant ownership, skill rank, or simply idle hands turning work into pretty while Snow wrote long essays outside. Your house shrugs and continues to label by notches and stains because getting the right tool the first time is its preferred theology. You keep a tinder policy, because fire that starts quickly starts quietly. A tinder nest, shredded inner bark, dried seed fluff, a kiss of old ember, sits in a carved cup on the jaw shelf, replaced before it turns untrustworthy. The bow drill's spindle and hearth board hang points out on a high peg so no one sits on ambition. A coal spoon, short rib with a small scoop, lives above the seed coal cradle. At night, sleepy hands can borrow one decision of fire without waking the room. Quirky tidbit number 2, the door whisk. Rushed bundle on a rib. Wears a tiny bead collar. You add a bead to every time someone remembers to use it without being asked. Children compete to advance the collar, and suddenly the threshold stays tidy by way of fashion. You consider inventing a festival in its honor, and then remember you already have 3 festivals for soup. You establish a no-snag zone with soft railings. 2 braided thongs run along the baffle's top and the jaw shelf's edge. They aren't strength, they're guides. At upright hours they train hands. At night they become a handrail from bed to door and back, a path you can follow while counting breaths instead of hazards. The path hums under fingertips: dry hide, cool bone, peg, peg, jaw shelf, bead hem, toggle, shell, back to warm. Joke 3. You thank the rail aloud and promote it to director of safe wandering. It stays humble and therefore remains employed. Mainstream fact, third ember. Some dwellings preserve continuous edging features, pebble beads, post alignments, repeated peg holes, interpreted as rack lines or screen tops, combined with soot entrance zones. They suggest circulation paths were engineered. Add in the points out logic we know from later cold house ethnography, and the picture becomes a room where traffic and edges were designed, not accidental. By now the door corner looks like a small shop that sells competence. The antler pegs keep their parade. The jaw shelf holds its little parliament of useful things. The quiet knife naps where a hand expects it. The tinder nest is plump but not vain. The knot ledger minds the day's appetite. The seed bar rests gentle across the threshold. The shell chime has nothing urgent to report. You take one last tour with your palm, peg, peg, jaw, lashing, cord, hem, and feel the room nod along. Before sleep you do the usual and a little more. Ember fox tucked, lamp pinched to a blue goodbye, seed coal smug in its cradle. You slide one knot on the ration thon, hang the coal spoon straight in a single peg because arrogance is how pegs fall at 3 a.m., and draw the equal sign on the door skull's cheek. 2 steady strokes that tell the tools they can rest pointing outward, safe, civilized. Outside, wind rehearses its memo to the baffle and gets bored. Inside, the door corner waits like a well-packed bag, and your hands relax because morning already knows where everything is. You sleep in a room that stands on bones and runs on pegs. Sunset doesn't arrive. It dials down. Color loosens, edges go soft, and the room begins to ask for a second small sun you can hold in one hand. You reach for the lampstone on the jaw shelf and feel how the basin knows your thumb already. Soft rock smoothed by years of warm fingers and polite fires. You trim the wick, a twist of moss and plant fiber, between nails so it will think like a candle and not like a bonfire with ambitions. A spoon of clear fat, yesterday's quiet skim, slides into the basin with the sound of a good idea. When you touch ember to wick, the room inhales in unison, and a coin of light blooms. You set the lamp on the mandible ledge, a polished rib reflector propped behind it. The bone throws light forward so your sewing corner gets the shine, while the wall gets the story. Shadows climb the ribs like careful vines. Every stitch hole shows as a neat, dark dot against the pale of hide. The lamp doesn't shout. It suggests, and somehow suggestion is enough to thread the world back together after a day of edges and weather. A needle tube clicks softly open. Sinew remembers how to be a line. Your hands go back to being hands instead of carrying teams. Mainstream fact to set beside the wick trimmer. Upper Paleolithic sites from the Pyrenees to the Luss Plains have yielded stone lamps. Shallow basins of limestone or sandstone with fat residues, wick marks, and soot, some plain, some engraved. A famous piece from Monmouth carries an ibex as if the lamp wanted a companion. Lamps were not rumors. They were evening tools that let sewing, mending, and stories keep office hours after the sun resigned. Light needs manners, so you give it rules. The wick should be shorter than your pride. A long wick makes smoke write its autobiography across the crown. The fat should be clean, rendered patiently until even gossip can't find a solid to complain about. The lamp sits shoulder high so eyes aren't bullied and hands don't meet flame by mistake. And the reflector gets a wipe with a greased snow cloth, a trick of a pinch of fat squeezed into clean snow, so it throws a clearer moon. You didn't know you were a lighting engineer. Now you are. You post a second lamp in a niche on the baffle's curve, trimmed low, enough for door work and the quiet parade of midnight, not enough to invite moths to propose politics. A final tiny eye of flame goes near the cash pit when you open it, then blinks out. Food likes privacy. The hearth hums at simmer. The lamps do the seeing. On good nights, their flames steady to the same size as if they've agreed to split the room like neighbors who get along about fences. Historians still argue whether lamps in Paleolithic houses were everyday appliances or mostly ceremonial, whether bone fat from big grazers or fish/sea mammal oils dominated by region, whether lamp niches in art caves lit painting or ritual or simply the way through. They also wonder about division of labor. If lamp tending and sewing formed a profession of patience some hands specialized in, or if everyone took a turn at the evening's small suns. The trays provide residue. The rooms provide reasons. Quirky tidbit for your apron pocket. A willow bark ring floating in the basin keeps a tiny wick upright when fat gets pushy. A pinch of chewed charcoal rubbed on wick tips cools the burn and tames smoke. And if you drop 2 grains of salt ash into the fat, the flame pretends to grow manners, which may be chemistry or may be the lamp liking attention. Either way, the rib reflector smiles wider. You learn lamp choreography by muscle memory. Before sewing, you breathe on the wick. If it gutters, trim. If it flares, scoop. If it purrs, stitch. You angle the reflector so light falls across your left hand, or right, if the gods signed your wrists differently, not directly into eyes. You keep a damp whisk nearby to scold sparks. And you slide the bead hem louver open 2 fingers, smoke up, warmth down, even when the wind is on stage insisting it wrote the rules. It did not. Joke 1, you clear your throat, hold the wick trimmer like a scepter, and proclaim yourself minister of small sons. The room approves by continuing to be visible. Under lamp glow the room sorts itself into circles of work. By the door, the kit wall keeps midnight hands honest. Near the hearth, the render dish steams a shy reminder that tomorrow's fat is almost ready. In the sleep bay, a curtain band hangs like a soft horizon, and someone unknots hair with a carved bone comb while telling a story that remembers not to wake the smallest ears. A child counts beads on your louver hem, gets to 5, and slides into sleep just as the lamp laughs in the reflector. Mainstream fact, second ember. Lamps and lamplight often show up with tiny soot fans above niches, polished spots behind basins, and charred moss or reed fibers, likely wicks, in sediments. In some houses, 2 light stations repeat across floors, hinting at paired work bays and long evenings where mending and talk braided the hours together like cord. A lamp is also a clock when the sky refuses to help. You learn that 1 thumb of fat buys about this many stitches, or 1 story in 2 interruptions. A full basin is 3 songs and a laugh in the 4th. The last blue sigh means bed even if someone hasn't finished the part about the fox that borrowed a sled. You keep lamp logs without writing. This much fat left means weather is winning, this little means we are. Joke 2, you tell the lamp it is head of scheduling. It immediately flickers, which is the administrative style of many heads of scheduling you've known. You rub a little lamp soot into a shell with fat and make a black paste. A thin bone wedge becomes a pen. A scrap of hide becomes a map that survives pockets. You dab tally marks on a rib, cash checked, pit resealed, raw moved to rack, so memory has friends. You darken the all caps you keep losing, the end of the quiet knife's handle, the 2 toggle heads that always pretend to be twins. It's not art. It's contrast, and contrast is mercy in weak light. Historians still argue whether the tiny grindstones with black sheen found in some dwellings were pigment palettes for body/gear or soot scrapers for keeping reflectors honest. Whether eyeliner like soot use, seen later around the world, has roots here as glare control and eye comfort in bright snow seasons. Your eyes don't care about the footnotes. They care that the lamp makes holes obvious and edges kind. Quirky tidbit number 2. A sprig of juniper dropped next to the flame, never on it, throws a soft perfume that convinces damp, woolly thoughts to lie down. Your band calls it house weather. Also, a thin sliver of bone set across the basin's lip acts like a bridge. You rest the wick on it when you want less talk from the flame without pinching it entirely out. There is etiquette to putting a lamp to bed. You do not blow. You pinch with a moistened twig or smother with a ribbed shell, then wait a count of 5 so the ember's pride has time to leave quietly. You wipe the rim, cover the basin so dust won't start conversations in the fat, and set the lamp cool on the jaw shelf where no stray elbow will discover how convincing a shallow dish can be. You look at the reflector and see your day's face thinly ghosted in soot. You leave it there or wipe it clean depending on whether the day felt like a friend. Joke 3. You tap the reflector and say, "Thank you for making me handsomer than facts allow." It reflects on this and with great dignity offers no comment. Light invites story, and story is the insulation around fear. Someone tells the one about the river that married the wind. Someone else counters with the rib that refused to be weather and became a door instead. Laughter edits the edges off the cold. The lamp shivers once when a gust thinks about courage, then steadies because the louver bead hem knows its job. The ember fox, low in the hearth's shoulder, glows like a cameo of tomorrow tucked into today. Mainstream fact, third ember. In houses with preserved lamp stations, work debris, beads, microflakes, bone offcuts, often clusters within arm's reach of the light, an archaeologist's way of watching someone's evening 10,000 evenings later. The light wasn't only for faces, it was for doing, for keeping tools honest and clothes obedient. At last, you make the rounds. Wicks trimmed to hush, basins covered, reflector leaned where it won't startle anyone at night. The tinder nest sits plump and smug. The quiet knife naps where fingers can ask it simple questions in the dark. You lift a lamp to glance at the cache pit plug, stone true, hide seal neat, and you nod because you love it when future you gets gifts from present you. Then the ritual that makes sleep slide. Ember fox tucked under a respectful ash blanket. Seed coal checked in its cradle like a secret you promised to keep. The bead hem louver set to 2 fingers night. And on the door skull's cheek, as always, 2 small strokes, the equal sign, the math of night, enough light, enough warmth. The lamps cool with tiny sounds, a kind of polite rain in reverse. Your eyes get heavy in the good way. Outside, stars rehearse their cold grammar. Inside, your small sons have done their shift and turned the room back to moon. You slide down into the fur and brush and mats, smell a ribbon of juniper and clean fat, and feel the gentle afterglow of work that found its stitches. The darkness that remains is the friendly kind, the kind that knows your name and has no more questions. You sleep, and the last thing you notice is the faint shine on the rib reflector like a promise kept. Things last because you negotiate with them. A hide coat is not a monument, it's a treaty you renew with needle, smoke, and patience. The house itself is the same, ribs, mats, vent door, each one asking for a little attention before the day gets ideas. So you make a round with your repair basket, bone needles nested in their bird bone tube, sinew coils tucked in a shell to stay politely damp, gut strips like translucent ribbons, a lump of birch tar wrapped in bark, and a small burnisher, polished rib, your wand for telling seams to be friends. You start where edges pretend not to be edges. A hide panel at the baffle has begun to pout near a tie. You nip an oval patch from a scrap, long worth the grain, and seat it with a whip stitch, each bite small, even, confident. Sinew shrinks as it dries and does half your tightening for you. You thank it out loud because gratitude is free and the room seems to like it. Where a stitch hole has enlarged into a gossip, you switch to gut thread, slick, strong, forgiving, and rub a breath of fat along the run so it glides instead of saws. A gloss with the rib burnisher flattens the ridge until fingers forget it happened. Mainstream fact for the pocket beside your all, across cold country ethnographies, from Nenets to Inuit to Sami, sinew thread and gut, intestine, strips are prized for sewing skin boats and parkas. Stitches are soothed with fat and sealed with glues like fish or hide glue. Seams are burnished to shed wet. Archaeology on the Luss Plains won't hand you the hide, but it will hand you eyed bone needles, spatulate burnishers, and polish on tool edges where hands repeated the same gentle insistence you repeat now. Smoke gets a vote in repair because smoke is medicine with stories. You hang the sling in 2 mitts on the inner rack and nurse the hearth into a smolder. Not scandal, just sweet wood and bone glow. Smoke walks through fibers carrying phenolics and savory stubbornness. It tells fleas to pick a different career and asks mildew to consider its choices. The room changes key. Juniper if you have it, artemisia if the step lends you a handful, a ghost of fat if yesterday's render was generous. You open the louver 2 fingers, let warmth swirl, and watch the mitts drink brown the way a tired face drinks tea. Historians still argue whether the smoke curing we infer from residue and ethnography happen mostly indoors in winter houses like this or in separate shelters, and how often herb smokes were deliberately chosen for bug control versus whatever the fuel pile confessed to. They debate whether the soot sheens on inner hides are repair drift or design, a chosen micro-weather that kept coughs shy. Your nose votes yes. The room's cough calendar improves when smoke has manners. Floors ask for ash like bread asks for butter. After the late bowl, you rake a thin veil of fine ash over the main aisle with the rib whisk. Ash dries a day's small sins, drips by the vent line, a footprint that couldn't shake its water. Tomorrow it will sweep out in a gray ribbon toward the midden, taking eggs and odors you didn't invite. You've learned ash as a toolkit. Mixed with a splash from the kettle, it becomes a soft fly that scrubs lampstones and greasy fingers. Dusted lightly under mats, it turns a would-be insect quarter into unpopular real estate. The secret is thin. Too much ash is a sermon. You prefer psalms. Quirky tidbit for the apron. A handful of clean sand in a stitched hide bag makes a shaker. A tap and a sweep lay the right amount of ash exactly where it belongs. Another, a pinch of salt ash along the door stone bullies ice into rethinking its relationship with the hem without starting a fight with your skins. The house loves small tricks. They keep the big ones from waking up. You make a sick map of the house in your head and treat it like a trail you want to keep open. Condensation? Widen the crown and lift the bead hem on the louver. Tickle of smoke in the sleep bay? Turn the baffle shoulder seam toward the vent, not the door. Faint sour by the cache pit. Open, sniff, reline with fresh grass mat, and pinch a greased lid over any broth you plan to keep a day longer. You are not fighting, you are tuning. Mainstream fact, second ember. Archaeologists love micromorphology, thin sections of floor read under microscopes. Bonehouse floors show thin ash laminae, trampled plant silica, phytoliths, and cleaning horizons that look like routine sweeping and resprinkling of ash. Combine that with lamp residues and smoke-stained inner surfaces, and you get a picture of houses managed by habit, low fires, air gaps, controlled smoke, ash hygiene, a housekeeping science long before the word housekeeping dressed itself. You keep an herbed rope near the rack, wormwood, juniper, wild mint, yarrow when you can borrow it from a summer memory. Little bundles hang where air turns, at the louver crease, above the baffle, near the door pegs. When the room sulks, you bruise a sprig in your fingers and tuck it in the lamp reflector's warm shadow. Smell is conversation, not perfume. We are clean. We are awake. We are resting now. Winter listens. Historians still argue whether plant traces in hearth ash, artemisia, juniper, grasses, are fuel facts or medicine hints, whether pollen in house dust means bouquets for ritual or simply that wind has opinions and walls catch them. They also debate whether ochre streaks on floor edges are decorative, insect discipline, or just the world on everyone's hands. Your hands decide. A smear of ochre and fat along a curtain seam sheds wet and discourages mold. Useful is a kind of beauty. Repair never leaves clothes out of the conversation. You lay a parka across your knees, find the elbow scuff everyone predicts, and stitch in a crescent patch, long axis with the grain, edges skived thin so the join vanishes under a burnish. You talk to children about buttons that aren't, toggles of antler or hardwood that don't freeze stuck, and you bar tack the eye loops so the worst thing that happens at midnight is a mutter, not a draft. You draw one thread over the next, hum the stitch song, and the lamp approves by not flickering. Quirky tidbit number 2. A bone comb rubbed with a dusting of charcoal makes snow glare days kinder. Dark powder along the lash line smudges like the world's oldest eye shade. Maybe it's vanity. Your head calls it glare control when the sun uses the plains as a mirror. Then there's breath, your house's and your own. You keep everyone's lungs in on the plan, kettle murmuring, vent exact, bedding aired when the sun admits it's awake. The cough that arrives every winter gets a protocol rather than a stage. Wet cloth at the louver edge for an hour, lamp low, smoke sweet instead of sharp, honey water warm near the hearth's shoulder. The room's air is a recipe you adjust with beads and vents, not a mystery you suffer. Historians still argue whether Declines in winter illness in small groups like yours are more about venting an ash or about group size and seasonal dispersion. They argue if house smoke traded one set of harms for another, insects down, lungs irritated, and how often lamps did most of the light lifting while hearths stayed almost asleep. You nod to both sides and keep the kettle on. Moist air and polite drafts are your chosen compromise. The midden becomes your diary at the door, ash ribbon, bones, peelings. You sort without ceremony, sharp to one side, edibles for later, those marrow-rich breaks, to another, stinking ambitions far downwind. A tidy trash day keeps neighbors cousin-friendly and foxes uninterested in your admissions policy. Joke 1. When a wind gust redecorates, you bow and say, "The midden curator accepts wind's critique." Then you fix it anyway. You appoint a day for big smoke. Hides off the line, gut strings looped wide, sinew skeins range like pale rivers, so the house smells like patience and everyone's sleeves taste of juniper for an afternoon. On those days you tell stories with long middles, the kind that keep you sitting still while smoke threads through everything and makes it all last longer. Joke 2. When a scene pops as you demonstrate the perfect stitch, you tip the needle tube an inch and say, "We'll accept your resignation after you train your replacement." Laughter fixes pride faster than glue. When the night rounds arrive, your repair basket goes home, needles counted back into the bird bone, thread ends rolled, tar lump capped, burnisher laid on the jaw shelf where midnight hands can find it. The ash veil is thin and even. The herb bundles can be heard by nose but not seen by eye. The lamp reflector has lost yesterday's fingerprints under one wipe of greased snow. The house smells like clean fat, faint green, and with that remembers stories. Mainstream fact, third ember. On bonehouse floors, archaeologists map repair zones by clusters of microliths, thread fragments, rare, but sometimes mineral-stained ghosts, bone polishers, and tiny beads fallen through mats. Hearth shoulders carry sweated fat and charcoal dust just where a lamp would ride. Ash horizons and plant ghosts track routine airing and sweeping. It isn't guesswork. It's a room that taught itself to last. Joke 3 is just a smile at the ember fox when it peeks through its ash blanket like a golden eyelid. You tell it, "Good shift." It blinks approval and pretends not to adore praise. The close is what the close always is. Seed cold checked in its little cradle, the bead hem louver set to night breath, the door cord tied with the right knot for the weather's mood. You smooth one palm along the inner hide where it has learned the shine of many hands, then draw the equal sign on the door skull's cheek. 2 calm strokes that say repairs done, smoke kind, floor honest. Outside, frost tries on new ideas. Inside, the house smells like a restored tool, and your breath decides to behave. You curl into the bedding and let the last thin ribbon of juniper fold itself into the dark. Sleep comes on quiet sols. Winter makes you a housekeeper, spring makes you a porter. When the reindeer draw a dotted line across the horizon and the rivers practice being roads again, your dome looks less like a destination and more like a kit waiting to be packed. Good news, you built it that way. Every rib has a memory, every panel a handle, and half of your architecture knows how to ride. You don't abandon a home, you fold it. You start with a list your hands already know. Lamps cool, coals banked into the seed cradle. The louver lashes unhitched and rolled like a well-behaved tongue. The bead hem that has been music all winter becomes a counting cord. Bead to bead you work clockwise so nothing sulks because it was last. Hides come off in named panels. You stenciled tiny ochre marks at the edges months ago. 3 dots marries 3. A fishbone pairs with a fishbone. It's the Ice Age version of IKEA and there's nothing funny about how charmingly it works. Joke 1. You announce yourself Minister of Allen Keys and hold up a bone awl. The room declines to laugh but your hands become faster anyway. Panels get brushed, aired, and smoke kissed one last time. then rolled fur in around a slim rib core and tied with bast that lets them breathe on the road. Lashings, rawhide and sinew. Get a drink and then a nap in the tool bag so they won't crack their opinions in transit. The inner liner ring unbuttons from antler toggles and becomes the sleep tent you can pop up on a noon windbreak when the sky turns into an advisor. The curtain band from the sleep bay rolls into a collar you'll hang later to conjure a pocket of weather wherever you decide night lives. Mainstream fact to tie beside your toggles. Across the Arctic and subarctic, stone tent rings, circles of rocks that once pinned tent hems, are classic archaeological signatures of portable homes. Ethnographically, Nenets Chum, Sami Lavu, and Inuit Tupik/Karmak show paneled hides, Tavalogic, sled pole frames, and stone or snow skirts. On the Lust Steppe, we don't often find the hides, but we do find stake holes, pebble spreads outside doors, and relocated bone rings in clusters. Clues that seasonal resets and portable thinking were normal. You move the ribs the way you set them, paired. Each couple descends, gets a cord collar, and leans against its travel mate so curves don't remember warps. Tusks that served as posts come out with parbuckles and are tied along the sled poles. Skulls, too proud to travel quietly, become landmarks for the next winter's return. Two stacked by the old hearth outline like a promise the plane can read. The jaw ring turns from wall into furniture. Half your jaws are racks now. The other half are sled runners, the flattest tables becoming shoes for heavy loads over spring crust. Historians still argue whether European Mammoth-Bone houses were mostly fixed winter bases revisited for years or short-term lodges reborn each season, whether the clustered rings at some sites are a village at once or palimpsests, decades of rebuilds in the same sweetly. They also quarrel, politely, about traction. Were early dogs already towing small sleds here? Or do we wait a little longer on this landscape before the partnership starts pulling? The soil offers jaw rings, ash stake holes. Intent keeps lighting one more lamp and saying, maybe both. The sled gets promoted from winter haul to department of leaving. Poles, last year's travois, are straightened over steam, greased with a thin marrow lick, and shouldered with a breastband you padded during long stories. You lay weight as if you're packing a person. Light high, dense low, fragile inside, tools outboard where hands can talk to them without speeches. A jawbone becomes a front bumper. A rib slat becomes a mud skate for crossing a thawed streak. A coil of spare things sleeps at the back to answer all the small questions roads like to ask. Quirky tidbit for the road. A swipe of lichen mash on runners behaves like temporary wax on wet snow. No miracles, fewer apologies. Another pocket trick. A braided grass brush tied under the sled's tail kicks slush off your track so the next sled doesn't inherit your bad mood. Before you go, you plant memory for next winter. A cache, jawstone lid, sod cap, gets an extra ochre stamp just inside the plug so spring noses won't ask. 3 bone pegs at elbow height inside the old doorway mark wind line, hearth line, best strip trench. A seed coal sleeps in a tiny clay-like cup half a day's walk down the reindeer road, in case the weather eats your courage and you need a fire head start. You are not sentimental. You're efficient at kindness for your future self. Mainstream fact, second ember. Some Paleolithic house sites show repeated reoccupation, floors superimposed with cleaning layers and recut pits, and local raw material refitting that implies short-range moves and returns. Seasonal fauna and burn patterns suggest winter-heavy use. While tent ring-like stone arcs at different spots on the same terrace read as warm season setups, lighter and less permanent. Road life has its own house grammar. The liner becomes a ridge tent on 2 ribs and a tusk. The sleep curtain makes a small still-weather pocket for a coffee elder. The lamp reflector clips to a jaw shelf peg between poles and throws a clear moon on evening repairs. Your door policy travels too. A wind baffle of 2 stacked scapulae just inside the tent lip. A seed lash bar at ankle height. A shell chime that moves from jaw shelf to sledge crosspiece, because even a road can use a soft click to think by. Historians still argue whether warm season camps on the steppe-hugged rivers for fish and plant work while winter domes sat higher to dodge flood and court wind, or whether task camps popped up everywhere like logic demands, here for flint, there for bone, elsewhere for tubers. They also wonder how much watercraft your cousins used along mouth-swollen valleys. Logs and bundle rafts turning heavy loads into floating problems instead of dragging ones. Your band votes daily, edges always. Follow food and predictable wind. Packing has a script. Children collect the bead hem into a coil and are placed in charge of knot dropping music. One person audits the knot code on fat bladders and travel paste. Another shakes mats over the old hearth one last time, a small bird bath for the house that was. You untie the soft rails, those braided hand guides along baffle and jaw shelf, and retie them along the travel tent's inner line so night wandering on a brand new floor still has manners. Joke 2. You raise a rib like a standard and announce the procession of furniture that walks. The rib behaves like nobility, which is all you wanted out on the road. The house becomes verbs: roll, tie, lean, lash, lift, prop. Noon storm? Tent panels flower and fold again. Sudden thaw? Runners purl through slush, and then find their crisp in shade. A flat place at dusk with a little lee and a dry patch becomes address. A ring of stones becomes a new drip edge. The ember fox reappears from its travel cup like a patent on tomorrow. Home is not a circle of bone, it's competence in motion. Quirky tidbit number 2, you keep a tiny panel book, 3 palm-sized hide squares stitched at one corner, that lists your house in pictographs: joring mark, rib pair mark, drip trench, baffle curve, cash sign. It's child-proof planning and elder-proof memory. And when someone new joins for a leg of the migration, they can read your room without learning your whole winter. You look back once, everyone does, at the old ring, tidy jaw course, reddened hearth ellipse, a few stones that will greet you next snow. You don't feel loss. You feel banking, as if you've left an account with your name on it, and a very patient clerk. Joke 3. You salute the jaw ring and say, "Hold my place." The plane pretends not to hear, which means yes. Mainstream fact: third ember. In many regions, tent ring, fields show recurrent use, with small changes in ring size and entry orientation across years. Evidence of return paths and seasonal circuits. The mammoth steppe clusters, Meseric, Mezin, Dalny Vestinus, Pavlov, combine heavy winter gear and nearby lighter features. Add faunal seasonality, reindeer, horse, and the picture reads as mobility with favorite addresses. Evening on the march looks like home because you've decided it is. The ridge tent breeds. The louver flap, now a crown slit between 2 ribs, learns the 2 fingers night setting in one try. The seed coal becomes a fire that remembers how to purr. The soft rails guide. The shell ticks once to say the wind will be polite. You draw the equal sign in dust instead of soot, 2 soft strokes that the road understands, and crawl into fur that smells faintly of juniper promises and render patience. You fall asleep to the same old inventory with new sky above, ribs, bundled, jaws, stacked, hides, rolled, lamp, cool, fox, embered, address, where you are, home, the method. Tomorrow reindeer will continue riding their dotted line. Rivers will keep practicing being roads. The sled will clear its throat and volunteer to be a verb again. You'll follow, because that's the contract. A portable house for a moving world, and a moving world that keeps you fed. You notice it the first calm day after a blow, the way the domes line their faces toward the same sensible lee, bead hems quiet, door curtains fat with good manners. Your house is not a lone thought, it's a sentence in a paragraph, a row of jaw rings and rib backs that make a neighborhood, not by accident, but by agreement. Footpaths declare themselves, A darker ribbon where mats were shaken, a lighter one where ash was always swept, a tiny bead trail where a child, who is not sorry, dropped music. The plain pretends to be empty. The plain is full of addresses. The windbreaks are cooperative art. A sawtooth of brush fences and rib palisades stands upwind, each family adding a tooth, a rank of scapulae here, a tusked crosspiece there, until the whole line teaches the gale to step around instead of through. Between houses, snow baffles rise like low, courteous walls, guiding drift into friendly piles that become waterbanks in late spring. You don't need a map to see the plan. You can feel it in your shoulders. The cluster breathes with one set of lungs. Mainstream fact to tuck into your mitten. At sites like Meserik and Mezin on the Dnieper Lus, and Dolny Vestinis, Pavlov and Moravia, excavators mapped multiple Mammoth-Bone dwellings arranged with similarly oriented doorways, shared windbreaks, and external activity areas. Butchery patches, midden arcs, that overlap in ways kitchens and lanes do. The aligned openings, concentric trash rings, and paired hearths don't shout village, but they hum neighbors. You can tell who cooked bone grease yesterday by the sweet mineral in the air and the clean basin drying on their jaw shelf. You can tell who mended boots by the needle glitter in the lamplight and the way their louvers set a firmer draft to carry smokes off. Common chores migrate like geese. Today your rack is fish. Tomorrow it's gut string for the family whose elder sings the best work songs and forgets to stop when the stew is ready. Joke 1. When someone asks if they can borrow your minister of small sons, that smug wick trimmer, you solemnly stamp their wrist with soot and declare them deputy of dimming. They return the tool and the soot, reluctantly. Historians still argue whether these clusters were simultaneous winter villages or palimpsests, houses rebuilt across decades on the same sweetly, whether open yards between domes were plazas for story, work floors for heavy butchery, or simply the only flat places once drift did the landscaping. They debate if paired hearths mean 2 families per dome or task stations. The dirt answers by offering overlapping middens, multiple hearth phases, and paths worn like sentences that were said again and again. Even disagreements have manners here. When a vent sulks and a neighbor's smoke turns left into your sleep band, you don't carve a grievance tablet. You send a bead with a child and an invitation to tea with instructions. 2 fingers for stew, 1 for sleep. Doors are low not just for heat but for tone. You bow, the room bows back, and even arguments remember to whisper. On bad cough days, the cluster goes into hearth rotation. 2 domes on big simmer, the others on lamp life. So the sky drinks the smoke and lungs keep their sense of humor. You begin to love the neighborhood's soundtrack. Morning is whisk talk and a little tick of shell chimes. Midday is a spread of bone tapping from flakers and a sizzle rumor from someone's slate. Evening is lamps agreeing to be the same size and a far laugh that travels like a comfortable fox. The ember foxes, plural now, peeking from a dozen ash dens, widen their golden eyelids in sequence as if the street were a quiet constellation with civic pride. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Every house keeps a visitor spoon, a carved rib with a tiny notch on the handle, hanging by the baffle. The notch says borrowed mouth. It goes into the boil and cools by the door so you can offer a taste without starting a war with your dishes. Also, children run a jaw sled lane down the main drift after chores. The rule is 1 bead toll, which is then transferred to the bead hem fund for repairing the louver music when wind writes its own edits. Common rules live in tiny chords. On a rib by each door hangs a knot ledger, 1 knot slid when ash goes out to the shared midden, 1 when water comes in from the safe hole, 1 when the cache is resealed with the right stone fox on top. If your cord is lazy by dusk, your neighbor's shell chime clicks thrice, the cluster's version of a raised eyebrow. No one likes rotating foxes sniffing at sloppy middens. The winds are full of opinions, you keep yours tidy. Mainstream fact, second ember. Around multi-domed sites, archaeologists chart concentric refuse halos, shared pits, and activity zones, areas of microdebitage, bead drops, and burnt bone that fit communal butchery and specialized work near certain doors. At Dolny Vestinus, kilns and figurines stand near dwellings, suggesting work neighborhoods rather than isolated huts. Where on paths and stone pavements near entries speaks a language of traffic and maintenance that sounds exactly like your chord ledger. You borrow hearths the way you borrow words. Someone's Louvre understands fish, another's understands tubers. When a storm loads the north fence and your baffle starts to mutter, you carry soup across the soft rail that now ties baffle to baffle between domes. Yes, the hand guide quietly extends outdoors in winter, braided rawhide brushing glove tips from house to house so no one must choose between lost and lonely. Joke 2. You stop at the third dome and file a formal complaint about the rail's lack of jokes. Its only response is not letting you wander, which is the joke it was built to tell. Historians still argue whether bead and ornament styles clustering within one terrace reflect house identities, kin lines, teaching cliques, or simply batch work from one talented hand, whether non-local stone moving among houses marks trade with distant groups or internal specialists making rounds. They also wrangle over dog footprints. Are they residents or visitors? The floors keep print jokes, tiny paws, tiny feet, ash smudges, that keep the debates alive. Hospitality has a sound, the soft click of a door bead hem lifted, the whisk over boots, the jaw shelf cleared an inch to make room for your lampstone. You sit, and the equal sign someone drew earlier is still visible on their door skull. Two easy strokes that look the same in every house, the cluster's flag. You contribute news. A ridge where the snow bites kindly, a drift that has learned to be a bridge, and carry away instructions, a new patch stitch, a better grease lid trick. The neighborhood is a school where homework is not dying. Quirky tidbit number 2, the cluster keeps a bone library, a rack under a fence of odd ribs, spare jaws, a skull with a friendly attitude. So every house has a place to borrow structure when a seam complains or a vent wants a new hinge. You sign with a knot on a cord, and when the rib returns you feed the library a bead. It's not payment, it's praise. Safety is the cluster's unwritten choir. Two domes keep lamps up while the rest sleep, a slow watch that trades at midnight. The shell chimes along the lane are tuned differently, one high, one low, so a night runner can navigate by ear and raised drift. Everyone's seed coal has a twin asleep in a common box under a slab near the central fence. If a room misbehaves, the neighborhood can hand you tomorrow without delay. You hope to never open the box. You like knowing it yawns rarely and politely. Mainstream fact, third ember. Some clusters show central features, pits, hearths, racks, without surrounding walls, interpreted as shared work areas. Synchronized orientations and similar construction across adjacent domes imply shared knowledge and labor. Bone refits, pieces from the same animal distributed among houses, hint at cooperative processing and distributed storage, an economy that behaves like your soup circuit. Joke 3. Once a week someone declares a formal session of the Council of Baffles. The agenda always includes 3 items: drafts, drifts, and dramas. The first 2 get solved. The third is usually a missing spoon that turns up under a mat after the council adjourns. Minutes are taken in ash outside the doors and erased by the next polite wind. At days and the street goes to lamplight in stages. 1 dome, then 3, then the far pair by the fence, then the tiny spark at the end that belongs to the elder who always stitches late and waves a needle like a scepter when you pass. You can smell a dozen versions of soup lifted by the same vent logic, hear a dozen shell ticks agreeing with the same weather, feel a dozen ember foxes purring through their ash blankets. You start to think the rail house is not any one dome, but the space between them, the lanes, the windbreaks, the rail you follow by glove, The habit of checking a neighbor's bead cord just because it's pleasant to see it correct. You bow through your door because the day has taught you to. The jaw shelf welcomes your lamp. The bead hem makes one small rain sound. You touch the soft rail that connects your baffle to the lane, and feel it hum with every hand that's steadied on it today. Then, as always, you draw the equal sign on the door skull's cheek, 2 little strokes that mean balanced, and imagine the same sign in ash, soot, and thought on 20 other cheeks around you. Outside, the wind travels the fence like a polite reader. Inside, the cluster's quiet comes in through the louver like second-hand warmth. You lie down, and the neighborhood holds. Years from now, thousands in fact, someone will kneel where your jaw ring once kept the wind polite and read your life the way you read tracks after fresh snow. They will arrive with trowels and brushes, little knives and bigger kindness, and they will speak to the ground as if the ground has been waiting to tell a joke. It has. It's just a very slow joke with a good punchline. You gave it the material, ash that learned to lie in thin veils, spalls from your flake kit, greasy kisses from lamps and stew, and the neat circle where the ember fox curled each night under an ash blanket. They will read all this, and they will nod like people who finally understand the shape of a sentence you wrote with ribs and habits. Evidence looks humble up close. A reddened oval marks your low hearth, the heat having baked the lust until even the color remembers fire. Around it lies a halo of ash, fine as sleep, raked and trampled into laminae that stack like pages. Cook, sweep, bank, repeat. 1 finger beyond is the soot strip where your lamp stone sat on the mandible shelf, a darker smile against paler soil. Near the door, the earth keeps a grit-polished ribbon where the rush whisk argued mud into better behavior, and the leeward outside shows a midden arc with honest layers, charred bone, peelings, dusted ash, then wind's edit. None of it is grand, all of it is true. Mainstream fact to tuck into your pocket with the all. Excavations at Mezherik and Mezin, Ukraine, and Dolny Vestinis, Pavlov, Czech Republic, reveal Mammoth-Bone dwellings marked by rings of mandibles and skulls, central hearths with calcined bone, and external middens. Micromorphology, thin sections of floor red under microscopes, shows trampled plant silica. Swept ash horizons, and burn layers consistent with banked, low fires and daily cleaning. The plane that pretended to be empty turns out to be a library. You can feel the post holes under your palms even before anyone draws them. Small stains, darker, more compact, arcs where inner racks once stood, or where a baffle rib rooted like a polite tree. In one corner, a pit you lined for rendering now holds greasy ghosts in its sediments. Lab people with patient eyes and little vials will coax fatty residues from the soil, fingerprints from ruminant tallow and stew that refuse to forget. They will say, kindly, that your lamps burned animal fat and your fire ate bone, because the signatures match ruminant and big razor chemistry better than wood alone. Historians still argue whether some of those pits were for cool storage first and trash later, or if they lived lives as multi-tools, cash when the world was generous, render basin when it required diligence. They also wrangle over whether the reddest hearth collars were clayed intentionally to keep sparks shy or simply lust toughened by repetition. The ground shrugs and layers and offers both readings. Your day today would have liked the flexibility, quirky tidbit for a back pocket. Tiny beads go missing the way spoons do, and when the archaeologist sees the floor dust, they will find them, ivory, shell, stone, caught between the mat's ghosts like time dandruff. Sometimes a mouse built a nest in your wall with a stolen bead as its throne. The field notes will call it a rodent disturbance. You will call it excellent taste. Some clues are maps in disguise. A scatter of microflakes gathers by your door. You did edge work where the light and air behaved. A string of burnt long bone fragments outlines the path to the rack. Bone fuel dropping crumbs like a trail to soup. Outside the curtain, the ground keeps a pebble spread where your drip trench emptied. The meltwater made a habit. The habit left a stain. They will draw this stain in pencil, then into a plan, then into a story that sounds very much like the one you told the weather all winter. Dating is a form of polite gossip with the past. Radiocarbon will sit at the table and, after a few careful sips of chemistry, place your house somewhere between about 30,000 and 14,000 years ago, depending which cluster you called home. A specialist whispers that Dolny Vestinus, Pavlov belongs to the Gravettian, roughly 30 to 27,000 radiocarbon years before present, where fired clay figurines sat not far from domes and kilns, and that Mezhirika's bone rings sing in the late glacial, 14,000 years. The dates anchor the song, the rooms carry its melody. Historians still argue whether every bone in the ring arrived by human plan or if some were natural drifts tidied into architecture, whether some rings were roof domes or windbreak corrals with partial covers, and whether your cluster is simultaneous or layered, families in one winter, or seasons stacked like thin breads over decades. They argue kindly. The earth tolerates the noise and keeps baking in the sun. A drawer of soil slides glows under a microscope. Plant vitalists glitter like tiny glass commas where your mats lay. Ash plates stack in subtle bands, and bits of char betray which nights the hearth told long stories. Far from the field, someone will tease ancient DNA from the dirt, said DNA, and it will whisper the presence of mammoth, horse, reindeer, fox, and people, a chorus caught in dust and footfall. Another colleague will pull starch grains from the char on a cooking stone, tuber ghosts whose shapes name families, and smile because dinner has finally admitted what it used to be. Mainstream fact, second ember. Studies at Upper Paleolithic sites have recovered eyed needles, spatulate burnishers, and retouchers alongside lampstones with fat residues, use where on antler tips matches edge retouching. And lipid analyses from sediments and artifacts often indicate ruminant fats. At Dolny Vestinus, fired clay figurines and evidence of kills sit within a broader domestic landscape, reinforcing that these houses were workrooms, not merely bedrooms with weather opinions. You left architectural jokes that only a trench finds funny. The jaw ledge near the door has a smoother polish where hands always landed. The tusk post pits have packed bases with tiny vertical striations from tamping, and the louver zone collects a faint drip fan of darker soil where condensation chose one neat line and obeyed you. A string of pebble dimples outside the door is all that remains of the whisk stone and friends. Every footprint long vanished, but maintenance itself has a topography that outlasts boots. Quirky tidbit number 2. Someone will find a sleek pebble with a perfect thumb hollow and argue about it for 3 months. Was it a lamp cover, a burnisher, or just a pocket comfort? A stone carried because it fit a hand and winter loves a talisman? The final report will say, utilized pebble. You'll know it was also a pet rock with a job. Historians still argue whether the eyed needles mean widespread tailored clothing with complex seams at these exact sites or if regional neighbors supplied the finest work through exchange. Whether dog prints and cannid bones in some layers prove companionship yet, or only proximity. They press the debate gently, as if not to scare the answers. Meanwhile your parka hangs in memory with elbows neatly patched and your quiet dog, real or hoped for, curls by the baffle in everyone's favorite reconstruction drawing. The refits tell a social story with flint and ivory. A blade let from your floor reattaches to a core found near the next door's hearth. A mandible fragment from the midden fits a piece inside a neighbor's wall. Tools and bones cross thresholds the way soup did, by custom. When they map these refits, the archaeologists draw lines between houses like the soft rails you tied along the lane, proof that neighborhoods were not fences but braids. Mainstream fact, third ember. Refitting studies at Gravettian and late glacial sites show artifact movement between dwellings, implying shared tasks and interhouse cooperation. Spatial analysis of microdebitage delineates work bays within domes, sewing here, napping there. exactly where your lamp and jaw shelf would have wanted them. And then there's the older evidence under everything. A sprinkling of ochre, a faint horizon of trampled grass ghosts, and one equal sign still visible if you squint. A tiny double streak of soot on the inner face of a door skull that fell and fossilized as a heap of fragments. 2 calm strokes. Balanced. The person with the brush will not write that in the report. They might mention soot streaks on cranial fragment. But when they sit up at night in a hotel with thin walls, they'll think about you drawing it with a fingertip and sleeping well. Joke 1 happens in the lab. Someone labels a bag. Minister of Small Sons, wick trimmer? Maybe, because the little bone sliver beside a lampstone has earned a title. Joke 2 lives in the field diary. Whisk stone, retired. Joke 3 is older. The trench supervisor lists weather behaved, and everyone laughs, because weather never behaves, not even for data.so. The earth does its careful reading and you become legible. Low hearth, quiet smoke, bones for beams, hides for sky, mats for mercy, door for manners, racks for February, lamps for hands that don't want to stop. The report will end tidy, the story won't. That's fine. Houses always hope to be understood, but they mostly wish to have held. Yours did. Even now, at your own day's end, you look around the room that will one day be paragraphs and plates, and see what the ground will see. A red in the lips, soft gloss on a jaw, a bead caught in a mat, a rib that hums when wind presses and does not creak. You tuck the ember fox. You cover the lamps. You set the bead hem louver to 2 fingers of night. Then you reach up, as always, and draw the equal sign on the door skull's cheek, 2 steady strokes for balance. Outside, frost drafts its future footnotes. Inside, you sleep, quite pleased to be evidence that learned how to be home. People love a monster house. They want palaces of bone, titans of tusk, thunder domes where heroes roast mammoth shanks the size of moral dilemmas. You smile into your lamp because you know better. You live in a cozy workroom that minds weather and appetite, a room where low talk, small suns, and useful habits do the heavy lifting. The grandeur is competence. The spectacle is a simmer that never gets bored. If a stranger could stand in your doorway without bowing, and they can't, they'd see a dome that chooses murmur over drum, elbow light over stage light, family over fable. You edit the myth every evening with the same 3 tools: needle, spatula, whisk. The needle makes stitches that keep wind from becoming a roommate. The spatula explains boundaries to coals that flirt with drama. The whisk files complaints on behalf of your floor and wins most cases. If a story insists on titans, you point at your jaw shelf and say, "Here, this is where giants live, reduced to good shelves and willing runners, doing their work without making speeches." The real miracle is not how big anything was. It's how small you can make the day's problems until they fit on a peg. Mainstream fact to lean beside the baffle. Excavations at Mesorik, Mezin, and Dolny Vestinus. Pavlov map modest footprints. Rings of mandibles and skulls a few strides across. Low central hearths. Racks and pits. Debris fields of napping, sewing, rendering, all of it reading as working households, not bone castles. At Dolny Vestinus, kilns and fired clay figurines sit near houses, confirming that craft and domestic chores braided into the same address. The sites whisper kitchen louder than cathedral. You keep your own museum of quiet. The bead hem that knows exactly how much wind to sing. The soft rail your hand follows at midnight. The seed coal asleep in its tiny cradle like a stored promise. When a visitor expects bellowing, they get the purr of the ember fox, the tick of the shell chime, the yes your floor gives when a warm stone meets ankles. Joke 1. You tap the louver with the vent hook and announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, the weather will perform no feats tonight." The room, thrilled, refuses to do anything impressive whatsoever. Historians still argue whether the modern showpiece reconstructions, Very tall, very tidy, very permanent, overstate roof height, hide finish, and interior luxury. Whether multiple families cramped under one dome or paired hearths meant task stalls rather than roommates. Whether your neighborhoods were simultaneous villages or favoritely spots revisited in cycles. They argue kindly, which is the correct volume for arguments about people who preferred their houses not to rattle. Your work sounds like contentment. The bone polisher murmurs as it kisses a seam. The knot board clicks once when a ration notch slides. The lamp breathes like a cat that has learned taxes. No one is chasing glory. They are chasing done. A boot stops leaking at the ankle. A cord learns to stop chewing its own tail. The louver's bead hem grows one bead handsomer because somebody remembered the whisk without being asked. If myth requires a duel, here it is, you versus a draft, 3 rounds, judges asleep, victory decided by toes. Quirky tidbit for your pocket, you can hear temperature in snow. Below roughly -10 degrees Celsius it squeaks like a tight new shoe under the whisk stone, a sound your house has learned to interpret as extra bead hem, smaller louver, foot suns earlier. Miniature physics performed nightly by people who would be surprised to learn they are physicists. Another, the notches you file into all caps double as a counting system. 1 notch for Parker repairs, 2 for tent panels, 3 for. Don't lend this one to Uncle because he forgets. Myths love swords, you prefer labels. The menu deflates legends politely, too. You do not banquet on impossible hunches every hour. You live on stews that respect bone grease, flat cakes with tuber opinions, a cooling broth glassed with a thin grease lid to keep truth from meeting air before breakfast. On fortunate days there's river silver on the rack. On clever days, bulbs roast and ash until they stop arguing. Feast, here means no one hurries. It tastes like time more than brag. Mainstream fact, second ember, isotopic and residue studies across Upper Paleolithic Europe and the Eurasian steppes show mixed diets. Big grazers, mammoth, horse, reindeer, plus plant foods, starches, underground storage organs, and where coasts and rivers cooperated, fish. Grinding stones with starch grains and hearths with render signatures make meals look varied and seasonal. Not single animal fantasies. The kitchen is practical. The drama is supper on time. Myth volunteers danger at every corner, wolves at the hide wall, blizzards at the vent, raiders with excellent dental structure at the door. Your danger looks like puddles that become something worse if ignored, like coals that develop ambition near a curtain, like a rank in the cache that says, "Bother me today." You fight it with brooms, beads, banked fires, rails for hands, pegs for points out. Your victories are invisible. No cough fits at midnight. No ankle finds a surprise blade. No soup forgets its pocket map and goes wandering down a seam. Historians still argue whether households divided work by age and sex the way some ethnographies would predict, or by talent and timing. Who sang best by the lamp got the needles. Who heard smoke best got the vent. Who beat bone into patience best got the render shift. The artifacts won't confess job titles. They confess stations. Lamp here, rack there, tools by the door, and the impression of a room that solved today with whoever's hands were nearest. You catalog your luxuries and laugh at how ordinary they look. A felt pad that turns a mean sled day into a forgivable one. A jaw sled lane after chores. A ribbon of joy down the main drift with a toll of 1 bead asterisk asterisk. Because even a careful neighborhood needs frivolous gravity. A visitor spoon on its peg so hospitality doesn't mix mouths with quarrels. The soft rail strung house to house so winter can be visited without turning ankles into plot twists. Joke 2. You assemble the family and declare a meeting of the council of very small comforts. The minutes read, approved, keep them. If you could hand the future a pamphlet, you'd title it, How to be Impressed by the Right Things. Admire the drip trench more than the jaw count. Praise the vent setting more than the circumference. Notice the ash veil, thin, even, effective. Complement the knot code that prevents stitch salve from becoming gravy at dusk. Your house is equipment for staying gentle, not a theater for being grand. Even the equal sign you draw nightly on the door skull's cheek is small, almost shy. The sign says balance, not triumph. Mainstream fact, third ember. The scale of these dwellings, the distribution of artifacts, and the microstratigraphy of floors all insist on regular maintenance, shared work, and task zoning, the architecture of ordinary life. Refitting studies show tools traveling between houses. Lamp residues show routine light. Eyed needles show tailoring done with care. If there is a pageantry, it is competence repeated until even the soil memorizes it. You give the myth one last chance as a party trick. You lift a tusk with 3 friends, parbuckle it down, and lash it against a sled pole in 7 motions your bodies know without your mouths. No shouting. No trumpet scribbles. Just hands that have learned a dance in a room that taught it kindly. Joke 3. You finish, bow to the rib that didn't complain, and promote it to supervisor of quiet success. It continues to be a rib, which is praise of the highest order. Evenings end the way truth prefers, with mending that thinks it's meditation, soup that believes in patience, and soft laughter that stays below the lamp's jurisdiction. The shell chime speaks once and decides it has nothing urgent to say. The ember fox curls in its ash den and dreams about an appointment with tomorrow. You reach for the louver hook, set it to 2 fingers of night, and feel the room settle like a good sentence closing its period. Then the little ceremony you never outgrow. You touch the jaw shelf, thank you, and the soft rail, thank you, and the knot board, thank you, and the seed coal, thank you for existing every morning as if it were your first day at work. Finally, on the door skull's cheek, 2 quick strokes in soot, the equal sign. Balance again. Not victory, enough. Outside, stars make their old case for all. Inside, all is smaller and warmer and sits in a lamp on a shelf you built from a jaw. You slide down into fur and mat, a citizen of a house that never promised spectacle and always delivered mercy, and you sleep feeling the most satisfying myth of all, home. Let the room soften now. Let the edges of ribs blur into a gentle curve, the way snow remembers a line but doesn't insist on it. The ember fox eases under its ash, smaller, dimmer, the color of a secret kept kindly. The bead hem at the louver goes from song to whisper, from whisper to the hush that lives between breaths. Even the jaw shelf, full of small purposes, grows still, as if it, too, has put its tools to bed. Your shoulders can lower, and then lower again. You've done the settings, you've drawn the mark. There is nothing clever left to perform, only the simple work of being here while warmth does what warmth knows how to do. Air comes in politely and leaves more politely. The floor keeps your back as if it were always designed for it, because it was. The lamp cools with faint ticks like soft rain reversed, and the room's darkness becomes the friendly kind, the kind with memory doubt if thoughts wander. Let them take the soft rail, hand to hand, from baffle to bed and back again, a slow hallway where you don't have to decide anything. If a worry tries a door, the shell chime offers one small click and the door decides to stay closed. If a night breeze looks for conversation, the louver gives it 2 fingers and no more, and everyone agrees that will do. The house is holding you the way good sentences hold meaning, without strain, without hurry. Balance has already been drawn. The math is finished for tonight. Rest is the only arithmetic left. So breathe in the faint sweetness of clean fat and juniper, of hide warm to contentment, of ash so thin it's practically a lullaby. Feel your weight settle into the brush and mats and fur, as if the ground itself were remembering how to be kind. And as your eyes close, let the last image be simple. 2 calm strokes on a smooth skull, the equal sign, the promise kept. Good night.